Yeah.
And refurbishable might
Definitely
be a better
not
word. But where do you think it failed, and where do you think, like, what lessons have you learned that you know you're not going to be making on Starship? To, like, do a mission. You're just trying to get data out of the thing.
Yeah.
What? I walk like that?
Yeah.
You guys don't walk like that?
But where do you think it failed, and where do you think, what
stretching.
lessons have you learned that you know you're not going to be making on Starship? To, like, do a mission. You're just trying to get data out of the thing.
Yeah.
God, this is such a great movie.
Give me sugar. And water.
Wait, where's the walk? No, fuck, it's not this. Men in Black, Bugman. Doesn't the Supreme Court ruling say, try your best to get him back, and if you can't, unlucky, aka facilitate it? It doesn't say you have to get him back or you've ignored the order. I don't know where the line is going to come down on that. Yeah, everybody makes a big deal about that, facilitate instead of effectuate. But I think the reason why they did that, and I'm guessing because I didn't read the full order, but I think the reason why they did it is to say effectuate. The government would very quickly and easily retort with, effectuate? You're going to command the U.S. on how to do foreign policy? Sorry, that's not happening. We can facilitate it at best, meaning that they, I believe facilitate in this sense means that they have to make available at the embassy in El Salvador a boarding pass for this person, you know, if they decide to send him back. But don't let anybody tell you different. If he doesn't come back, it's all has to do with Donald Trump. It's whether or not Trump wants him back or not. If Donald Trump wants him back, then he'll say it, and we'll have him back. It's this idea that, oh, we can't do it. It's El Salvador. Bro, it's El Salvador. Give me a fucking break. God, Asmon slop. Camera going black. Wait, what?
So this is nuts. Look at this.
This, to me, is one of the most shocking pieces of poll data that I truthfully have seen this year, or maybe in any prior year.
Really?
Yes, really, because I want you to take a look. Cares more about the needs for people like you. You mentioned the Cape Ball. We got a tie, even after this tariff war had already started, split between Democrats and Republicans on how people feel.
This is wild.
Which party
this on
here
CNN, too.
More for needs of people like you. And why is that so surprising? Because I want you to take a look at prior years. Democrats always lead on this question. Back in 2017, before the 2018 midterm.
That's a crazy correction, too. Like a plus 19, a plus 23 in terms of percentages. Think about a percentage. A 13% drop is nuts.
13-point lead. 2005, a 23-point lead for Democrats. 1994, which was a big Republican year, a 19-point lead for Democrats. And now, all of a sudden, a tie? All of a sudden, the Democrats, who are the party of the people, no more. We get a tie on this question, on a question that has traditionally overwhelmingly been a Democratic advantage. Which party cares more for the needs of people like you? It's truly something I would not have expected to see, especially after this tariff war had begun.
Where does it show that Republicans are making the most gains?
Yeah, again, you talk about party of the people. Look at this. Cares for the needs of people like yourself.
Yep.
Look here. We got non-college. We got those with a college degree. Among those with a college degree, it's the same score. Plus 18 points for Democrats in 2017.
This is how it's
plus
been
18
forever.
points for Democrats now.
Gen Z
look
men,
among non-college voters. Look here. It was plus 7 for Democrats in 2017, and now Republicans had overwhelmingly gained. Plus 9 points.
That's nuts.
That is, the gains have been concentrated, at least.
Because you think about that, like, I mean, you go plus 7 to plus 9, or minus 7 to plus 9, like, that's 16-point differential. That's huge. That's a massive differential.
Among voters without a college degree, the working class, that is where Republicans have gained, even since the beginning of the
The reason why this happens is because a lot of people that work in trades are sick of being talked down to by somebody that works in an accounting department that makes half their salary, that thinks that they're smarter than them because they went to school and they've got 100.
Wait, I'm so sorry. What did he just say?
That works in an accounting department.
Massive differential. Among voters without a college degree, the working class. That is where Republicans have gained even since the beginning of the
The reason why this happens is because a lot of people that work in trades are sick of being talked down to by somebody that works in an accounting department that makes half their salary, that thinks that they're smarter than them because they went to school and they've got $100,000 of student debt.
So almost every single thing he said here was incorrect. So chances are, if you want to run the numbers, people on average that go to school are smarter than people that don't go to school. I'm sorry if that like hurts you too much. I just think it's funny that the same community that would play race realist tropes about like other races of people won't accept the fact that if somebody graduated college, they're probably on average smarter. And I mean that in the most absolute brutal sense of the word, IQ, G, whatever you want to say, are probably smarter than people who didn't go to college. Number one. Number two, the guy in the accounting firm is making 2x the salary of the trades worker. I don't know where this idea comes from that all these trade guys are ultra well compensated. That's not true. So that's retarded. Number three, average student loan debt when you graduate was like, what was it, 28 or 38K? It's not 100K. That's an insane amount of debt. Number four, going to trade school means you can take on debt as well. I don't know where the idea that that's fucking free comes from. It's not. So like every single part of every single thing that he just said was incorrect. This guy is cooking at absolute zero. Okay?
That's the reality, is people are sick of being talked down to by people that think that they're smarter than you because they went to college to learn some bullshit. That's the real reason.
Trump administration, the Democratic base is now...
The Democratic Party is the party of patronizing college people and, fake authority people that constantly talk down to everybody else, and they want everybody to listen to them and just respect their authority that they've appointed themselves with. Okay. Yes, they're Karens, right? Yes, the party of Karens. It's the HR. Like, the Democratic Party is the HR department. Big surprise.
Wow. Big surprise.
Most people don't like that.
LeMayo.
Those with a college degree, among the working class, those without a college degree.
These polls are pure bullshit. How do you know that
It's so crazy, all of the contradictory ideas you have to be able to keep in your mind, that like Silicon Valley and tech and Elon Musk are the party of Donald Trump, but also like the trades workers and also the billionaires, but also like the uneducated people, but also like all the guys working in and it's like, what do we even, Jesus Christ.
Will participate in any of these polls? I'm sure a true poll would be in favor of the Republican Party. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. And the polls that are favoring us are rigged because they don't favor us enough.
Question of which party cares more for people like yourself.
Your reference points are, as you were pointing out, just before a midterm election. So obviously, let's kind of look at that. Where do things stand for the fight for Congress?
Right. Okay. So you have this question, right? And then there's the question, ultimately, are Republicans going to get punished in this midterm election, in part because that's normally what happens, the party in power gets punished, but also because of this tariff war. And I want you to take a look here at the generic congressional ballot. Where we were in April of 2017, Democrats were already ahead by 7 points. In November of 2024 on this question, it was a tie, and then, of course, Republicans won control. Where are we now? It's Democrats, but just by a point. This looks very much still like what we saw in 2024, not like what we saw.
They need to get out of this hall monitor shit.
Yeah, true.
Like the moment that I hear somebody talking about some kind of fucking identity issue, some social issue, trying to like use it in soapbox, that's over, bro. Like people are fed the fuck up with this. Like, they are fed up with getting dictated by Karens. Have shit people told them, Karens telling you what to do.
Hold on. He is wrong, but some trades make a lot more than most jobs. My trade has me in the top 5% of male earners of all ages. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to shit on any job, okay? Whatever you have to do to work is fine, all right? But on average, trades make less than college degrees. These are just numbers. I'm sorry. Like, can you make more doing a trade, for some exceptional trades versus some other jobs? Yeah, sure, of course. That's true of everything. There are probably some fast food restaurants, depending on the position you work, that pay better than some tech jobs. It just depends on your positions there. But on average, like...
Protests are Karen fast? Exactly, they are. I can't stand it. I vote against these people. Even the thing is that I just hate a bunch of bitches that want to go and tell me what to do. It's actually that fucking simple to me. I don't want to have a bunch of people sitting around telling me what the fuck to do. Telling me what I can say, telling me what I can't say. Trying to patronize me and be like, oh, this is it. You're against protesting? No, I'm not against protesting. You can protest all you want. But the problem is that these people also are trying to protest and tell you that you can't say the word retarded. Like, guys, you look at a Venn diagram between these two groups, it's a fucking circle. I don't want to have somebody telling me what words I can and can't say. That's it. It's a gotcha. That is a gotcha. Let's go perm ban him. Great idea. Great idea. Good point.
Got him.
Perm ban him.
Get this guy.
You got away. Can't win them all, boys. Can't win them all. Anyway, so this is really the reason. And you want to know the real reason why this shift happened? It's that learn the code bullshit. It's that patronizing, oh, well, we're going to ship your manufacturing job over to another country so it can be done by a sweatshop worker or an 11-year-old. Well, pretty much the same thing. And now we're going to patronize you and say, like, it's too bad.
in 2017. If Democrats think they automatically have a ticket back to control of the House, I'd say, hold on a second, Republicans still have a real shot at this, despite all of Trump's theatrics over the last month with this tariff war.
There really is interesting information coming out in this that you're pulling out. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you. I think it's interesting. Kate agrees.
No, nobody thinks that the Democratic Party is out for workers whenever all they talk about is trans issues and shit like this.
Yeah, true.
Like, nobody is thinking that, like, this is something that matters whenever the focus is always in, like, these really weird wedge issues about social stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's it. And so in censorship, yeah, exactly. Like, normal people don't want to be censored and told what they can and can't say on social media.
Normal people actually do want some forms of censorship in different areas. That is absolutely the case. But we can pretend like it's not. Okay, Chief.
Normal people don't want to have their reality dictated to them by somebody who's decided that they are, that they understand reality better than they do. And you want to know the real reason why there's so much damage done to, like, that credibility is because of COVID. You can't spend 4 years saying, or 2 years saying, oh, well, this is what the authorities say. You have to listen to the authorities. And then the authorities are constantly wrong. You can't have that happen. Like, if you spend 2 years with that messaging, what ends up happening is people just stop believing it. That's it, 100%. Yeah, exactly. Democrats act too high and mighty. They do. They absolutely do. And it's that patronizing high and mighty shit. Yeah, they're crying wolf, and we know all the wolves are dead. Yeah, exactly. It boils down to an attitude problem. Democrats are in this position because they default to tolerant to crazies. Well, they advocate for them, right?
Yeah.
Like the trans and sports shit.
True.
Like, I'm sorry, but, like, you can't tell me that you're the party of science when you want trans men to compete against women. That's it. You can say that you're the party of science, or you can say that you're okay with that. You can't do both.
How can one man be so fucking brave? Oh no, this should be 3. Fuck. Sorry, hold on. One more Asmon slot. What is this? Tipping. Wait. His tweet is, tipping culture gives upper middle class Americans the rare opportunity to shame and look down on working class Americans with moral righteousness. That's one of the reasons we still have it. A socially acceptable way to class shame. Wait, what?
Holy shit. God damn. Yeah, just do a custom. So what you do in a situation like this, by the way, is you just do a custom tip and you make it 0. This is something they do at Torchy's Tacos here in Austin, and that's how you do it. I mean, for me, yeah, you custom and then go to 0. Now, obviously not optional. Apparently, it clearly is. And so, anyway, this is something that happens a lot, and I feel like custom tip equals 0. Yeah, if I don't sit down and get shit handed to me and I'm not tipping, I have no problem tipping people now because I have a lot of money. But, like, before that, I never tipped in general, even if I was being waited on or anything like that. I think the fact is, like, somebody bringing me my food, like, I've said this 100 times, so I don't want to, like, get into it too much. But, like, I would much rather tip the chef and, like, the cook that made my food than the waiter that brings it to me. It's like stolen valor almost, right? I mean, you're the one, like, you've got a guy that's, like, making the food. He's sitting in there in this fucking kitchen, sweating his fucking ass off, dealing with this, and then it's apparently now...
There's a philosophical aspect to this that he doesn't understand, and then there's, like, a realistic aspect to this that he doesn't understand. So the philosophical aspect, you're supposed to be getting tipped on really good customer service. Now, in America, at least, it's basically expected that you tip literally no matter fucking what, which is cringe. But cooks don't ever interface with customers. They're in the kitchen. So it wouldn't make sense to ever tip a cook. That's the conceptual level of it. On the applied level of it, cooks get paid more than servers. Cooks are usually paid whatever the wages of the line cook, whereas servers are paid $2.13 an hour, $2.15 an hour, whatever, and then they make up the difference on tips. So whether or not you think it's right or wrong, who cares? I mean, it's not what I'm talking about in terms of it being right or wrong, but that's why the tip only goes to the front of the house. The restaurant staff all get tipped out. No, chefs and busboys get tips. I've never heard of the kitchen getting tipped out before, unless there's a huge tip and somebody wants to be nice. Bus boys in front of house will get tipped out, sure, but it's all customer service facing stuff.
It's somebody else that you've got to do it with. Fuck that. It's hot, bro. Yeah, it's hot. And, like, you're giving the money just to some cute waitress. I don't give a fuck about that. Yeah, I don't care. And so I just want to have good food. And so that's who I'd want to reward, right? The majority of places pay the cooks way more. Yeah, and I think that, honestly, like, you think about it, which would be easier to replace, a waiter or a what do you call it, a cook. I think a waiter, definitely, because, I mean, again, they already kind of have replaced waiters, because if you order the food yourself online, nobody had to take your order. So they've already...
I don't even know if he's talking about the same type of model. Don't make me defend servers and shit. Okay, I hate servers. I hate all lower class, working class people, but it's not really the same type of thing at all, but okay.
Done it in a way. So that's the way I see it.
Okay.
Oh!
That was our Asmon slop for the day. Now we got Hasanabi slop. Okay, multiple people in chat are saying that it's very common for cooks to get tipped out in Canada. So maybe in Canada that is a thing more.
And AOC speech aren't leftist enough. I mean, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. They're right. They are correct. They're not wrong.
Wait, what?
And AOC speech aren't leftist enough. I mean, they're not wrong.
Bernie and AOC speeches aren't leftist enough.
And AOC speech aren't leftist enough. I mean, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. They're right. They are correct. They're not wrong. Like Bernie being like, Israel has a right to defend itself. It's ridiculous. Okay, what do you mean Israel has a right to defend itself?
Okay.
Big Dog has been 18 months. Like, it's 18 months of genocide. Okay, the people that are upset with that are perfectly valid and perfectly reasonable. But you have to also understand that there's dual use here. Okay.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Like, go to the fucking rallies and recruit instead of just like sitting around and being like, well, I would do it differently. You know what I mean? I understand feeling discouraged when you see someone who you have looked up to, admired, saying ridiculous things, you know?
Oh. I wonder if, because he didn't get to do any more interviews when he was at that rally or whatever, I wonder if he got a chance to talk with some people in their campaigns, and they said that they probably weren't going to go ahead with any more Hassan interviews with AOC or Bernie. And now he's like, well, fuck it, this bridge is burned, so now I'm just going to shit on him for my audience credit or whatever. I wonder if they aren't working with him anymore. Otherwise, I don't know why he would go so negative on him now.
Know what I mean? And AOC speech aren't leftist enough.
And again, my job, is to take the world as it is, all right? And the way the world is right now is however China got there, it's there. And if you don't think it's there, then you are really missing something.
Well, that maybe gets us to current policy. It's very hard right now to podcast about trade policy. We're recording this on Wednesday, April 9th. It'll come out Tuesday of next week, so 6 days. God knows what will happen. If we recorded this morning, it would have been a different podcast than it is now. But after tanking global markets for a week, then beginning to see the U.S. bond markets unravel, the Trump administration backed off, paused, did a 90-day pause on tariffs on countries that have not retaliated, which is just a generally strange concept.
Yeah.
But double down on Chinese tariffs, right? I think it's up to 125%, something in that range. China is retaliating against us. The Trump administration's broad view, articulated by J.D. Vance and others, is that at the center of their entire trade strategy has been that we need to build all this in America again, not amidst all of our friends, right? The Biden administration had a friend-shoring strategy, but Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, he talked about his vision, and that the way to do this is very high tariffs, incredibly high on China specifically, but also, frankly, on the rest of the world, because what you're trying to do is bring it all back here. And that is a way of making us capable of competing with China. There's a series of papers out there that make this argument that China has a kind of hegemonic level of dominance over global manufacturing. They're not the only manufacturers, but they have primacy there. And we have it on the financial architecture of the world. And what, in this theory, what Trump and his team are trying to do is take manufacturing back from China. Do you think their theory makes sense?
Hire clowns, expect a circus, okay? If that is your theory, okay, then go ahead, put all the tariffs 1,000% on China. That's day one.
Oh, but
these
our
guys
allies?
are entirely first-order thinkers. Day two has to be a strategy for what you do the morning after here. How do you then build the industrial base that you want to take advantage of the time you're buying with your tariffs? So what are these guys doing? Trump put up a wall, against China, and then they went out and shot the American car companies. Ford was just downgraded today. I saw its stock, I think, is down to $7.50. Why is that? Because Ford did everything that Biden asked it to do, that a rational company would ask it to do, that we would want it to do. And then what does Donald Trump do? He comes in with his right-wing woke bullshit and says, we don't do EVs here. EVs are for girly men. We only do manly industries. Well, fuck that, okay? Because look what happens now to Ford. So you say we want to bring this here. I don't want to have my kids screwing in parts, into cars. I want them designing, investing in and inventing the next generation of EVs. But let's go back to that ecosystem I talked about, Ezra. EVs, robots, autonomous cars, batteries, clean energy. If you say, oh, we're not to do the EV part. Before I came over here, I read Trump wants to reopen coal plants. And he loves drill, baby, drill. Okay, so it doesn't make any sense. You're building a wall against China. Great, I'm all for it. But what are you doing behind the wall? So we catch up. You're taking your own companies out and shooting them in the back if they're not right-wing woke. What's the project? What the Trump administration is focused on? How many billions can we take away from American universities of their research funds to punish them for DEI strategies? Now, I'm here not to advocate DEI, but if I had a limited time in the world right now, I sure wouldn't be focused on that. I'd be focused on doubling down on the research capacity of these universities. I'd be doubling down on NIH. What are they doing? They're cutting the budgets of our Crown Gem research facilities. So it's all
the cutting of, that's just probably the saddest. I think that's easily the saddest shit that this administration is doing. And it's almost as sad. No, it's more sad to see so many Americans clapping their fucking flippers along with it, to see them just tearing into our funding for research in the United States. The United States was already arguably losing out on its research kind of dominance over the world over the past few decades. Europe has caught up quite a bit in terms of overall research capacity. But to see people clapping along with that is so fucking sad.
All just bullshit. They're not serious people. They're clowns.
But you are not all for building a wall with China. You're making an argument that even among Democrats, I think, is somewhat more subversive right now, which is that if you were a serious person, you would do with China what we did with Japan in the 90s, which is, by the way, when Donald Trump came up with all of his trade theories. This guy's had the same opinions on everything for decades and decades now. What we did with Japan is we brought in their car companies here and we learned from them. What China did with us was that they brought in our manufacturers and they learned from them. And what you are saying is that if you take seriously how good China has gotten at manufacturing, then what you would try to do is begin bringing in its factories here as the condition of access to our market to learn from them.
Exactly. You should do 50-50 joint ventures with Xiaomi. You can build your cars here, 50-50 joint venture, number one. And number two, you have to build your supply chain here as well. So you're not just bring all the parts in, from China. You got to build the supply chain and the factory here, joint owned, exactly what you did to us. But I argued for this before with Huawei. Huawei has a very dodgy past, and they've been involved in all kinds of lawsuits, with different companies over IP. So what I said at one point was, I'd say to Huawei, here's the deal. We're going to let you wire Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. You can sell your technology in those 3 states. We're going to watch you for 3 years. We're going to see how you handle that. We're going to see how you handle the data. If you do well, we're going to give you 2 other states. We created no incentive for them to be a better actor. There was no ladder up or out at all. We just then tried to kill them, and their response was, you talking to me? You talking to me? And they now went out, got into the fitness gym, and they might kill us. Yeah, so if all Trump is doing right now, Ezra, today, I don't know, I've lost track of what the tariff is on China. We may be getting toward infinity. I have no idea. But if behind that is a strategy to basically do what we did the other way, I'm all for it. But if the strategy is to only build a wall so we can go back to digging coal and only depending on oil and killing the wind business and killing the EV business, then this is going to end in such a disaster. All right, that's the immediate problem. You have another problem coming down the road with AI. And AI is going to be injected into everything, from your car to your toaster to your refrigerator and maybe even your body. If we and China don't have a trusted architecture for managing AI, then everything, Ezra, is going to become TikTok. And this whole debate we're having over TikTok, can we have it? They're listening to us. What are they doing with the data? That's going to apply to your toaster, to your tennis shoes, to your car. And so that's coming down the road.
But that's already here. They don't allow our major technology firms there. And with the exception of TikTok, really, we don't allow theirs here.
Yeah.
We are the governing, I always say with AI policy, there are 3 goals. Make it safe, make it faster, make it ours. And make it ours is always the goal that wins. In every conversation in the Biden administration, in the Trump administration, make it ours, which means, by the way, we are racing much quicker than we should be to make it safe, because make it fast then becomes the overriding objective. And so we're already there. And you will like sever these two AIs off from each other, these two AI branches off from each other. You've already to a large degree severed the two internets off from each other. You are going to have this world where you do bifurcate. And there's something interesting about that too, that I've been, we are probably by most accounts a little bit ahead of them on AI, but not by much at this point. But they have something increasingly that we don't, which is a digitized structure for their economy and for the integration of their economy with manufacturing and other things, but particularly payments, communications, et cetera, that you could embed AI in very, very rapidly. You know, when Elon Musk talks about making, you know, the app formerly known as Twitter, the everything app, what he wants it to be is what China already has, which is these apps that do communications and payments and all these different things. And then if you embedded AI into them, which they're doing, you have much more surface area of the economy that you could optimize very, very, very fast.
So that was the theme of my column, you know, that they have massively digitized. It's a cashless society now. You have beggars with a QR code in their begging bowl. I went with my colleague Keith Bradsher to Zeekr, one of their new car companies. We went to the design lab, watched a designer doing a 3D model of one of their new cars, putting it in different contexts, desert, rainforest, beach, different weather conditions. And we asked him what software you were using. We thought it was just some traditional CAD design. He said it's open source AI 3D design tool. He said what used to take him 3 months, he now does in 3 hours. 3 months to 3 hours. Because they have such a digital connected system, you just take that hypodermic needle, fill it with AI, and inject it into it, and it can optimize so many things. And it's for all these reasons that I'm worried about the bifurcated world. I'm worried about that. That world is not going to be at all stable or at all prosperous in anywhere near the last 40 years. And so if I have a choice, my choice is to argue, and I don't care if I'm the only one arguing for it, that we and China are going to have to get together and actually be the partners that create an architecture for this. Otherwise, we're going to just keep racing each other, you know, in some kind of crazy AI version of nuclear, probably bankrupt ourselves in doing it. And this gets to my gut feeling about the whole world we're going into once we get to AGI, Ezra, which is that I think to manage this world, climate, AI, and disorder, we are going to have to learn to collaborate as a species to a degree that we have never collaborated before. I am a big believer in my friend Dov Seidman's argument that interdependence is no longer our choice, it's our condition. The only question is, will we have healthy interdependencies or unhealthy interdependencies? But we are going to rise together or we're going to fall together. But baby, whatever we're doing it together. That is my view.
I don't know if that's true, though. Okay. I mean, look, you're much more of a student of international relations and history than I am. But countries can rise and fall separately. Superpowers decline and others rise. You know, Japan was going to be the next great power. Now it's an aging society that is in much more trouble. One of the ways of thinking about this that has been on my mind, watching the Trump administration light the confidence the rest of the world has had in America on fire and call it greatness, is this idea that China's strength is manufacturing and America's strength, which we derive.
Did Destiny talk about the black kid Carmelo Anthony stabbing a white teen? What's Dee's take? It seems bad if he stabbed him. I don't know why people are trying to turn this into a fucking race war. It's super fucking weird.
It is financial. One of the lessons of all history is he who controls the financing controls the world. And what the Trump administration, I think, thinks it's doing is taking back manufacturing from China. I don't think it's going to do it. But what they're definitely going to do, I think, is make it possible for China to take financial share from us. Because people are not going to trust us anymore. Yeah. If we can tariff them at any moment and will, at any whim, they will try to unwind themselves from being part of our architecture of financial dominance. It is an extraordinary source of American power. But if you use it too much, then people will voluntarily release themselves from it because they are voluntarily part of it. China's very, very sophisticated payment structures. It has the capacity to lend a lot of money. It is playing itself up right now as a more stable player in international affairs. It is trying to create closer relationships with Europe, with Japan, with South Korea, with a lot of people and countries that it has traditionally had very rough relationships with. And so I don't think we're necessarily going to rise and fall together. I think that, I mean, if you told me that Trump was a Manchurian candidate and you had evidence of it, it would be very hard for me to refute. Yep. Like, what would the Manchurian candidate do if not this?
Right. Look, let's go back to what would you be doing if you were serious on trade? The first thing you would be doing is saying to the Chinese, you now manufacture about a third of all products in the world. That is not sustainable. You can't make everything for everyone. You have got to leaven out your economy. You know, to be retired in China is to get like a $5 a month pension, and you've got to be using that energy domestically and buying more from others. The conversation has to start there. They are making too much, and we are consuming too much, Ezra. So why don't we then get our friends and sit down with China as a united front, the European Union, Korea, Singapore, Japan, the Philippines, and make it the world against China on this issue? you would have told them over the next 3 years, we're going to gradually be raising tariffs, 15, 20, 30% each year. So you can know what's coming, but we're going to keep doing that as a collective. And then behind that wall, you would be offering them, one, the opportunity to invest in America, and two, you would be serious about that ecosystem I talked about and giving our government, our companies incentives, doing everything we can to get the infrastructure and opportunities for that ecosystem to get going. That would be the rational thing. What did Trump do? He made it America against the world. The whole world at the same time. So he actually threw away our single greatest competitive advantage over China, which is that we have allies and China has vassals. Our colleague David Brooks likes to say, Trump is always the wrong answer to the right question.
So I want to note something that I think is a useful way of thinking about trade here, that I think there's been this problem that people keep trying to illustrate a more sophisticated architecture around Donald Trump's thinking than is actually there.
Yes.
And one of the things they'll reach for is this issue with China. China makes about a third of the world's goods, as you mentioned. They're on track to make about 45% of it in the 2030s. And if I'm remembering the number right, I think they account for something like 12% of consumption. 15%. Now that's hugely imbalanced. For a country that big to be that imbalanced between production and consumption creates an instability across the entire global system. One of the completely idiotic things that even skeptics of our relationship with China.
Please throw this on your next viewer mail. The good fellows answer your question by the Hoover Institution. You'll get triggered so good.
I've been appalled by that the Trump trade effort has attempted is to treat everything in terms of bilateral trade between America and other countries as if we should have a balanced trade account with Vietnam. What do we make with our advanced manufacturing?
TLDR on the relevance of the stabbing issue. People are mad that funds are raised for him to have a legal defense. He argued self-defense. People are already crucifying him. I mean, if people want to go fund me for court cases, they can do it. I think sometimes it's stupid to donate money to some people, but people have the right to do it, no?
The Vietnamese are going to buy. It's a completely insane way to look at the world. But you do want to think, particularly in the very, very, very big players, about global imbalances. Because if there are huge global imbalances, not just like individual bilateral ones, like then you have a bit of a problem.
Yes.
And this is where you might have imagined the world to put pressure on China. Not that they need to manufacture less, but they need to consume more. More of their manufacturing needs to be consumed domestically, and then more of their capacity needs to be shared with the rest of the world to maintain access to these markets. But this idea that we're going to infuriate every other country along the way, it's just a very strange way to think about power. When your biggest fear is that China is becoming a compelling alternative to you, you're going to make yourself a less compelling alternative to them.
Crack at it. He was giving me her used food.
This is how you get IBS, bro.
Yeah, this is my told you. Thank you. This is the $20 breakfast burrito. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Does this work? Did you see? Oh, wait, you have the wig on. Oh, my God.
Yeah. Enjoy it.
That's pretty chill.
Okay.
We have a week of Wig Dan.
Did you see the message about the tariff?
Yeah.
China?
I was going to say something. You want to say it?
We're just absolutely fucked. Like, it's what people were saying on Friday, they were right. So.
What were they saying on Friday?
Where they were saying it's not 125.
Well, we know it's 145.
Well, so our team was under the impression it was 125 when we met on Thursday to go over everything. So everything that we went over is inaccurate.
So what are we at?
So now we have to reconfigure everything. We're a really bad
What's
place.
the tariff?
It's 152.5.
152.
Because it's 125 plus the 20 plus 7.5.
Base.
152% tariff. Where before it was how much?
It was between 20 to like 30 something. Yeah.
Dude, this country, there's people in
The problem is that nobody gave us any time. Like, give people like 6 months. Say this is gonna happen. You may want to start figuring your shit out.
No, you're devastating.
There's stuff already in boats coming here. There's stuff already made over there, and like we work a year in advance. So we're gonna have to cancel what we can.
I think there's gonna be like hundreds of thousands of small businesses that are gonna go bankrupt.
They're gonna go under. Yeah.
Because like, it's one thing to have to change where your manufacturing is.
Well,
it's another thing to have to do it overnight.
It's
when you're
impossible.
already committed to having a ton of product in China that you have to now pay 150% tariff on to get.
And it makes no financial sense. People are not gonna pay that much. If I had to raise the price to make it financially make sense,
Asmongold said that he has been very disappointed with you and Hassan after the elections. He thinks you both became extremely radical. Well, I'm always open to chat if he wants to.
I'm gonna pay that much.
It's too much.
It's too much. So.
It's called sports. Just charge that shit back.
Did we pay for it already?
We have stuff that are already paid for, and also it's seasonal. Like the next collection has swimsuits in it, and that stuff's already on the way. So that stuff we will have to release and raise the prices on. We have no option.
Yeah, but we're wondering if we can even run the business.
I don't know, because like I was saying before, apparel was already having a hard time before Trump came into office. So this is the last thing we needed.
The whole.
And that's not just me; it's the industry in general. Everybody in apparel was having a hard time last year. And was hoping that maybe this year things will turn around, but nobody expected this.
How about that for a turnaround?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's utterly insane what's happening. And actually, I was watching a piece.
Did you listen to the Daily today?
Yeah, I did.
You did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just about a small business owner who was killing it, had this prospering business that she spent like all this time building, and it was finally popping off. And now she's fucked.
She's fucked, and she's afraid she's going to lose her home because she took she got all these POs with like Walmart and Target, and those are really big. So you need to commit to like really big quantities, and you kind of need to take a leap of faith. And I think she took a loan that like you put your house against it.
It's a reverse mortgage. It's not a loan.
It's a, I don't know what the term is, but
a reverse mortgage loan isn't something.
Knowing everything she knew leading up to this, it made sense to do it. Nobody knew this would happen overnight. So now she's royally fucked.
I mean, if they're already committed to you legally, it's really
you pay it back.
Yeah,
it's not doesn't seem that risky.
Yeah, and sometimes as a business owner, you have to take risks.
Yeah,
this isn't my first rodeo.
So there's that happening. So I think we're going to see thousands.
And she was asked, so what about like the actual goal of this? Do you see yourself being able to do this here? And she went over that scenario, and it was literally impossible in so many ways. It was just not even close to anything possible to do it here.
Why?
Well, she went over all the different scenarios. Like for one, you need to find the manufacturing, like the machines.
Mm-hmm.
The machines you need to buy from China. So would you pay 150% on the machines? Then it takes like 6 to 7 months to set up the molds. You need to find somebody that specializes in that and can set up her facility. Like those people are not even here. There's nobody here that specializes in that stuff. And then like materials you need to bring on its own, and that she needs to pay. Like the materials are not here. Everything, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Especially again when there's no incentive for people to invest.
She went through the cost. It would cost her more still, even with the fucked up tariffs.
Yeah.
It would still cost her more to do it here.
Yeah. So you're going to see thousands of small businesses going under. It's going to be catastrophic. And then in China, I was watching a report of a...
The US auto industry had been expecting a slow march, according to Cox Automotive, but instead saw the hottest new car sales in 4 years, as buyers rushed out to replace their aging cars before Donald Trump's tariffs on imported cars and car parts, as well as those on imported aluminium and steel kicked in, as these tariffs are expected to drive up the prices of both new and used cars this year. While Trump announced a 90-day pause on many of his Liberation Day tariffs, the hold does not apply to the imported car tariffs. On top of that, it's difficult to say how hard the huge tariffs on Chinese imports will hit the auto industry, as a lot depends on how the Chinese content of imported car parts is treated by US customs. The economists at Cox Automotive updated their sales predictions after the auto tariff announcement came out in March, saying that the rush to buy new cars might continue into May, or until whenever the inventory that dealers built up before the tariffs is drawn down by anxious consumers. They say in their report that they expect new car prices to rise dramatically by the second half of the year, slowing sales noticeably. The New York Times reports that demand has been particularly high for Japanese brands like Honda, Subaru, and Nissan, as buyers assume that they're all imported. All three Japanese companies, however, have factories in the United States, though they do import some cars. When we look at the list of cars with the most American content, 8 of the top 12 brands are non-American brands. Former Reagan economic advisor Arthur Laffer, who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Trump in 2019, warned in a recent paper that the auto tariffs could add almost $5,000 to the cost of new cars when they kick in, and that the taxes could weaken the ability of US automakers to compete with their foreign counterparts. Laffer later told Fox News that he believes that Trump is a great negotiator and that he could use the tariffs to negotiate freer trade deals with other countries, but said that if the tariffs remain in force and we see an escalation, it would be disastrous for both America and the world economy. Analysts at Wedbush estimate that the tariffs could reduce new auto purchases by up to 20% and raise the prices of a typical car to a US consumer by $5,000 to $10,000. The Center for Automotive Research says that Trump's auto tariffs will increase costs by about $108 billion for US automakers in 2025 alone. They estimate that the average imported vehicle sold in the US will be hit with additional taxes of $8,722, while the Detroit 3 automakers will be hit with an additional tax of $8,641, making them $81 cheaper than the foreign competition. The United Auto Workers Union hailed the tariffs as a victory for auto workers and the end of the 3-decade free trade disaster. US auto manufacturers like Ford and Stellantis responded to the tariffs by announcing temporary deals for employee pricing. The British carmaker Jaguar Land Rover stopped US shipments entirely. The Korean carmaker Hyundai announced that it would not raise prices for at least 2 months to ease consumer concerns. So can manufacturers and dealers just take the hit of the tariffs without passing the cost on to consumers? Well, according to Car Dealer magazine, auto manufacturers make around $2,400 on each new car sold. And according to JD Power, dealers charge a markup of around $1,200 per vehicle sold. So there is no way that they can swallow these tariffs and remain profitable. They'll have to pass the cost on to consumers. Is the UAW right that these tariffs are a victory for auto workers? Well, Stellantis have already furloughed 9,000 workers in the United States, and according to research from the Detroit Free Press, the big 3 American automakers will likely see a reduction of about $5 billion in operating profits in North America for the rest of this year due to tariffs. That decline will hit the labor force in their wallets. They say that the tariffs will cost American auto workers who are paid by the hour between $1,000 and $5,000 in profit sharing for the year, and that there will be reductions in bonuses and earnings for salaried workers, executives, and those who work for suppliers too. While the initial impact of the tariffs has been mostly negative, in at least one case, Trump's new taxes have had the intended effect of increasing US production. GM announced last week that it would increase production of light trucks at a factory near Fort Wayne, Indiana. The 25% auto tariffs are expected to cover more than $460 billion worth of imported vehicles and auto parts annually. These tariffs are obviously controversial in a car-centric country like the United States. Longtime viewers know that I rely on my sponsor, Ground News, when researching polarizing topics like this, so that I can gather factual information stripped of bias. Using Ground News, I can see that over 155 sources are reporting on this topic, and they're about evenly split between the left, the right, and the center.
Ground
I can
News.
see that 94% of the sources are rated as high factuality, showing the credibility of the source and the timeliness of corrections. On the right, WLOS interviewed a Ford dealer who's excited about the tariffs, saying that he's confident it will help American companies in the long term. On the left, the Rocky Mountain Outlook reports that steep tariffs could drive both new and used car prices, which are already high due to pandemic-related disruptions, even higher. Ground News is particularly useful for topics like this, which have a political edge and an international angle. Their app and website organize the world's news so that you can compare coverage, track missing angles, and spot biases that might shape public perception. For a limited time, you can get the same plan I use for nearly half off. Go to ground.news/pb or scan the QR code on screen to get the Vantage plan for just $5 a month, a small investment in making informed decisions. Importers have been working hard from the moment Trump won the election in November to get ahead of expected tariffs. Everyone knew something like this was in the pipeline. Trump campaigned very heavily on this issue. The FT reports that international car makers rushed to ship vehicles and their core components to the United States before the tariffs hit, and that rush led to a 22% year-on-year rise in vehicle shipments from the EU to the US in February. Those from Japan increased 14%, and shipments from South Korea were up 15%. One person that I spoke to told me that as soon as they saw the news of the assassination attempt last summer, they knew that Trump would win the election and started filling their US warehouses while they could still book freight. CBS reports that Apple flew 600 tons of iPhones into the United States from India before the tariffs were applied. Now that the auto tariffs are in place, the FT reports that many car makers are holding thousands of cars at US ports where the storage fees are quite high, as the tariffs only need to be paid once the cars are removed from the port. The automakers are also trying to move cars into US bonded warehouses where they can temporarily store vehicles without paying this new tax. The article says that many industry executives are hoping that the tariffs won't last for a long time, and they're trying to wait it out. One industry executive warned that the piling of imported vehicles at American ports could get quite ugly, with ports set to fill up fast in a few weeks if the US tariffs are not softened. In terms of who the winners and losers are so far, BBC Top Gear reports that small British manufacturers like Jaguar Land Rover, Lotus and Mini are losers as they don't build cars in the US. Audi doesn't build any cars or engines in the US either, and while Volkswagen has a big US plant, it exports a lot of its US built cars, and about 2/3 of the cars it sells in the US are foreign made, and this is just the way modern supply chains work. They say that GM is a big loser too, as it really took advantage of Trump's USMCA deal, and while it has a lot of factories in the US, they rely on other factories in Canada and Mexico. Reconfiguring the US factories would take years and a huge investment. The fact that tariffs are constantly being announced only to be cancelled a few days later means that if they started reconfiguring their US factories, the investment might be wasted if the rules were changed again on them. It's extremely tough for firms to decide what to do in such a rapidly changing business environment. The Wall Street Journal reports that Porsche, which has no US factories, is one of the brands with the least options. Its North American dealers apparently accepted 37% more new cars in the first quarter this year than in the same period of last year. The company's high inventories, they say, imply that it rushed even more cars into the country, but it hasn't delivered them to dealers yet, as Porsche recognizes sales when it sells cars to its dealers. Porsche has seen a fall in demand in Germany and a collapse in demand in China, which was so severe that North America is now its largest market, at least for the moment. Some of the brand cachet of luxury brands like McLaren, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce and Ferrari is derived from the idea that they're built in their home countries by skilled craftsmen. These companies might be better able to pass the tariffs on to their customers, as there aren't really any American-built rivals for the types of cars that they build. Ferrari already announced that they're increasing pricing in the US by 10% for cars that were ordered but have not yet been delivered. Porsche says that they'll honour pricing for cars that have already been ordered and that they haven't yet decided how they're going to adjust pricing going forward. Ford, Hyundai, Kia, Tesla and Rivian are expected to be the least impacted by the new tariffs, as they have large manufacturing footprints in the US. Ford's production for vehicles it sells in the US is much more local than GM's. Its global operations, according to Top Gear, including the large one in Europe, are well quarantined, as the European factory neither sells many vehicles to the US, nor do Europeans buy many of the models built in the United States. American manufacturers will still be hit hard by the new tax, as they use a lot of foreign components, many of which come from China and can be taxed at rates as high as 145%. According to the Center for Automotive Research, the new taxes are expected to cost the Detroit 3 automakers $108 billion. Consumers won't necessarily be able to avoid price hikes by buying American-built cars either, as when the foreign companies are forced to raise prices, domestic manufacturers who are facing lower competition can raise their prices too, increasing their profit margins. And that's usually the whole point of tariffs, to reduce foreign competition and boost the profitability of domestic companies. According to the FT, the biggest losers include German car makers BMW and Mercedes, since many of the parts used in their American-sold vehicles come from Europe. Subaru additionally imports all of the powertrains for its US-sold vehicles from Japan. Car and Driver report that Mercedes initially considered no longer importing its more affordable models to the US, with the plan to focus only on the high-end models, which have more markup. Mercedes have since refuted this claim, saying that they remain focused on sales growth. Toyota, the world's largest car maker, who joined the tech bros and donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration in January, were singled out by Trump in his tariff speech, where he said Toyota sells 1 million foreign cars a year in the US, and went on to say that Japan was the worst violator, and in many cases, the friend is worse than the foe in terms of trade. The FT reports that Toyota has signaled to its suppliers that it intends to reduce manufacturing costs in response to the tariffs in an attempt to avoid hiking prices on consumers. Most Japanese car makers already have factories in the US and are possibly wary of building any more due to the high costs and low availability of workers in the United States. The overall impact of Trump's new tariffs, which are being rolled out in an extremely chaotic manner, where they're announced one day and cancelled the next, is still unclear, as a lot even depends on how the US Customs and Border Protection interpret the rules on national origin. It's not just the 25% car tariff, there are the tariffs on imported metals and the 125% tax on imported Chinese parts too, which will in many cases be added on top of long existing duties. So some Chinese goods will be hit with tariff rates as high as 245%. Many cars and car parts could be hit with the full tariff on Chinese imports, as in 2019, US Customs and Border Protection decided that Volvo's Swedish-built cars should instead be classified as being Chinese cars and subject to much higher tariffs, as while the cars were assembled in Sweden, a lot of the components and sub-assemblies came from China. The courts in cases like this have to decide how transformational the assembly of parts into a finished product are, and there is, of course, plenty of room for manoeuvre in that decision. Sam Lowe writes in the FT that while there are rules around this, it can still be extremely difficult to predict which way US Customs will go on a specific issue. There are still numerous unanswered questions around how import tariffs will be calculated. Sam Lowe writes on his Substack about how a tariff can be applied on the steel and aluminium content of downstream products like sports equipment. If this type of calculation is applied to cars and car parts, it means that each imported good could be assessed a tariff based on the weighted average of the national origin of its component parts, assuming that the importer is willing to fill out all of the necessary paperwork to prove.
Which a lot of people also don't pay attention to, like the process on this too, like even filling out some of these sheets or the information, like the bureaucratic nightmare of trying to figure out if I sell you a computer and I'm selling you that computer for $1,000, but I imported just the steel, or I imported the chassis from a country that made the computer case out of 50% imported parts from another country that's terrible. Like it's such a clusterfuck nightmare of stupid shit.
Prove that. According to the White House tariff proclamation, if US Customs and Border Protection determines that the declared value of non-US content of an automobile is inaccurate, the 25% tariff will apply to the entire value of the vehicle, regardless of its actual US content. This puts importers in a very difficult position. Donald Trump has said that he couldn't care less if car prices rise as a result of his tariffs. According to The Economist, the cars that will be most affected are the cheap ones that would be unprofitable to import or manufacture domestically. KPMG are predicting that US automakers who are slightly less impacted than foreign brands are likely to focus on building larger, heavier SUVs and pickup trucks, which are already mostly assembled in the United States and have the most markup, giving automakers the most room to absorb the cost of tariffs without passing them on to customers. The average price of a new car in the United States is already around $50,000. If manufacturers are going to get rid of affordable models, the days of the average American being able to afford a new car will be over. It seems unlikely that tariffs will encourage companies to open new factories until they're certain that the new tariffs are permanent and that investing billions of dollars in new production capacity will pay off for them in the long run. Should that happen, they'll have to pass on the cost of building a new factory and the higher wage costs to American consumers, who will then be paying more for cars than anyone else in the world. If the tariff barrier was taken down, let's say if Trump struck one of his famous deals, the factories would...
Wasn't the U.S. already engaged in protectionism for domestic car manufacturers prior to Trump? Everybody's got a little bit of stuff going on kind of like that, but not to this level.
Quickly become unprofitable and need to be shuttered. Bloomberg has described Trump's tariff announcement as the biggest inflationary event for the auto industry since the COVID pandemic, when automakers went months without being able to make new vehicles. They report that some dealerships have been calling up customers who bought cars from them a few years ago, offering to buy the used car back for more than it cost new. Apparently, the rush by consumers to buy ahead of tariffs has pushed used car inventories so low that dealers are now desperate to buy popular models at any price so that they can quickly flip them. NPR reports that while some buyers have been rushing out to buy a car before prices rise, others are delaying purchases because they're worried about their jobs being at risk in the shaky economic environment, or they're trying to build up savings in case of a recession. They say that some shoppers are hurrying up, others are stepping back. Meanwhile, the tariffs themselves keep changing. While many would still argue that US manufacturers are the big winners from these tariffs, a complicating factor is how foreign countries and foreign consumers respond. Bloomberg reports that Canada's retaliatory tariffs will hit US manufacturers the hardest. Under Canada's new rules, the tariffs on an imported vehicle will depend on where its components come from, and Mexican parts are exempt under the USMCA. Under the Canadian rules, if a car is assembled at a US factory with 80% US content and 20% Mexican or Canadian components, the 25% tax will apply to the US content only, resulting in a total tariff rate of 20%. Bloomberg reports that Tesla has stopped taking orders in China for the Model S sedan and the Model X minivan, both of which are imported from the US. They had to do this after China announced retaliatory tariffs on the United States. Another problem for American brands is that there's growing evidence of shoppers around the world refusing to buy American brands. The most prominent example is international customers refusing to buy Tesla cars. But there's also been the emergence of barcode scanning apps that allow shoppers to reject American products. Danish stores have even started tagging European goods to allow consumers to buy them instead of American brands. And most amusingly, a Swedish Facebook group has been set up calling for the boycott of US companies, including Facebook itself. So if you join that group, you've already failed at your goal. According to the FT, the number of Europeans traveling to the United States has cratered since Trump took office, and cancellation rates for bookings to the US were 16% higher in the first quarter this year than a year earlier, with travelers from
This is so weird because I thought that we were constantly told over and over again that everybody loves Trump and everybody loves America more than everybody loves Trump more than Biden, and now Trump is going to make everybody love America all over the world. What happened to that? What's going on here?
Centers like the UK, Germany, and France showing an even higher cancellation rate of 40%. Forbes reports a 70% drop in travel between Canada and the United States. It's very hard to imagine how any of this could be good for US businesses. It would appear that while they've just been introduced, the new tariffs are already causing problems for the auto industry. The cost of insuring against debt defaults in Europe's car industry has exploded, with small manufacturers being hit the hardest. Aston Martin, which was already unprofitable, is heavily exposed to Trump's tariffs, as they don't build in the United States, and US customers account for 37% of their revenues.
Damn.
Car component makers have been hit too, and the FT reports that auto parts suppliers are likely to be hit the hardest by the tariffs due to their lower margins. Some argue that while everyone else is playing checkers, Donald Trump is playing 4D golf. But it's hard to argue that the rollout of Trump's tariffs have been anything other than chaotic. It's not obvious that there's any real strategy, and it doesn't appear that Trump's economic advisors know what's going on any more than the rest of us do. Over the last few days, we've seen massive tariff announcements which have thrown markets into chaos before being delayed for 90 days. While the market rebounded on the announcement of the delays, the remaining tariffs are still extremely high, at 10% on all countries, 25% on cars and steel, and over 125% on China. On Saturday, we saw an announcement that smartphones, routers, chip-making equipment, computers, and laptops would be exempt from the tax on Chinese imports. And then on Sunday, the US Commerce Secretary walked that back, saying that the products are included in the semiconductor tariffs, which are coming in probably a month or two. When asked to clarify whether tariffs on Apple iPhones might come back in a month or so, Nutlick replied, "Correct, that's right. We need our medicines."
Did you call him Nutlick?
And we need our semiconductors and our electronics to be built in America.
Army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones. That kind of thing is going to come to America.
The Economist made the argument a few days ago that the tariffs could hit the Chinese economy hardest by causing such a severe slowdown in the US economy that demand from America dries up. That's not really the victory that anyone's hoping for. Kyu Jin, a professor at LSE, made an argument in the FT a few days ago that if Washington's aim is to suppress China's rise, it's going about it the wrong way. She argues that tariffs don't just alter trade flows, they redirect resources and reshape industrial structures. She says that if Trump's goal was to curb China's technological progress, he would keep tariffs low on the bulk of Chinese exports to the US, locking the country into low-margin basic manufacturing. He would encourage high-tech exports to China, making sure that progress in its advanced components stalls. She points out that this is the opposite of what's actually happening. Ironically, just as the China shock pushed the US out of low-end manufacturing, the Trump shock is propelling China to reallocate resources into higher-value advanced technologies that compete directly with the United States. Most economists agree that something does need to be done to rebalance global trade, but the on-again, off-again tariffs being announced on a daily basis based on formulas that appear hastily thrown together appear to just be damaging both business confidence and consumer confidence in the United States and around the world. If you found this video interesting, you should watch my video, Are Exports the Only Source of Growth Next?, which was based on the Michael Pettis book, The Great Rebalancing. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Ground News, using the link in the description, and talk to you in the next video. Bye.
Bye. I saw this fight on Twitter the other day, but arguing about international law is fucking actual cancer, so... Wait, I'm trying to find the first. I thought there was another Dave Smith tweet about this. Hold on. Oh, this was the dumbest one that I saw. So they're arguing over basically collateral damage in war. And Dave Smith comes out with you're sidestepping my point by invoking legalities and doctrine, while I'm making a simple philosophical point. If the exact same action would be considered international domestically, how is it unintentional when conducted in a foreign country? Forget about the implications of this view or even the morality for the moment. Without appealing to a set of theories or laws around war, just explain it. How does the foundational concept of intent change because a politician or a group of politicians declare a word and it takes place on foreign soil? So domestic and international rules are very different in terms of how you deal with a population of people, because a police force in a country is assumed to be able to exercise things against civilians and subject them to the law and legal system of that country. So for instance, in the United States, if I was a big bad guy and the US police were coming for me, they have to treat me like a US citizen. So they can arrest me if I am threatening to kill somebody or whatever, maybe they could shoot me, but they're going to arrest me and they're going to take me to court, and then I'm gonna have to answer to the entire US legal process or whatever. In war, you can't send in your soldiers to arrest enemy civilians. There's a variety of things that doesn't work with this. One is you're not going to arrest enemy civilians and subject them to legal processes, number one. Number two, generally police have a lot more, I'll use the word oppressive, but they have more power over a domestic population. Your police can go to your courts and they can wiretap you, they can investigate you, they can do all these things that international armies can't do. They don't do this to civilians in other countries. It's just the idea that you would try to say, the idea that you would try to make this claim that, like, well, international and domestic issues should be treated the exact same is so stupid. There's a reason why in international law, why they're treated completely differently as two entirely separate things. But I don't even think he's read anything about this. So it's funny to see somebody say, while I'm sitting here trying to condemn the actions of some international party, let's ignore all of the legality around it and just talk morally. It's such a retarded, it's like a person who's like, I want to talk about this idea, but I don't want to actually critically engage with it in any way, size, shape, or form. I just want to like kind of like stoner bro talk about it. And apparently I bring this fight up because apparently they just did a show this morning, I guess, or maybe yesterday.
Free American. I can talk about what I like to.
So I've noticed you can. The point is, what are you pushing?
What am I pushing?
Yes.
Liberty, free markets, peace, prosperity.
I was surprised by how the debate itself went. It does feel like people are living in different realities. When you look at the aerial footage of Gaza, that does not describe every single strike Israel has launched.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now?
You just don't know the information you need to know to make that judgment.
If someone were to do that, you would call it intentional murder, right?
That's not true.
You're not raising questions. You're not asking questions. You're telling people something. I think there's a whole bunch of guys doing that. I think David's doing that. It's a shame.
Oh, also, people should get into the habit of just asking why more. I think it would be a good counter to somebody will come out and they'll be like, why did the Rothschilds do this? Blah, blah, blah. Like just asking questions. And then you should ask them, why? Why did they? I don't know. Did you look it up? You asked this question publicly. Well, did you actually do anything to figure out the answer? Why did they do that? I don't know. You tell me. Oh, you didn't engage with the question at all? You didn't even begin to look it up? You have no concept whatsoever of why they do this? You're literally just like, in the time it took you to put this out as a tweet, you could have just Googled it and come up with some kind of answer and then argued with the underlying rationale maybe, but...
Shifting thing. Comedian or historian?
In part, the problem is that we haven't reconciled ourselves to the idea that we speak one way in front of the world, another way behind closed doors, and that this is actually natural and normal.
These things are always like Piers Morgan, which is fine, where everyone's screaming over each other. Well, Joe Rogan's debate between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray has dominated conversation for days now. Supporters have been spinning for both sides as if it was a presidential election debate. And some felt the president himself picked a team when he posted a glowing endorsement of Douglas's new book the very next day. Almost as interesting as the main debate were some of the issues it raised about the way that debate has transformed in the digital age. First is so-called credentialism. Should someone with old-fashioned qualifications get more of a say than someone who does a lot of research but ultimately has none? Do you need to travel to a specific country or experience a war to have valid opinions about what's happening there? And should the podcasters who now wield more influence than any TV network be more judicious about who they platform? Or is that kind of censorious, judgmental gatekeeping the very reason they got so popular in the first place? Finally, who won? Well, joining me to debate all this are two people with very different views on all the above. One is John Spencer, Executive Director of the Urban Warfare Institute, who took issue with a number of Dave Smith's points and felt he was epically dismantled by Douglas Murray.
Epic.
And the other is Dave Smith himself, host of Part of the Problem, who's a comedian and libertarian commentator. And he felt...
I think we had Spencer on an episode of Bridges. I think the John Spencer guy knows his international law stuff pretty well, so I'm very curious how this is going to go. Okay.
Of course, that he remained epically intact and will be joined a little later by Eric Weinstein. So let me start. First of all, Dave Smith. Are you surprised, Dave, about the reaction to your showdown with Douglas Murray? And do you believe you won?
It's not about winning or losing.
I'm not surprised at all by the reaction. I was surprised by how the debate itself went. But as it was going that way, I knew exactly what the reaction was going to be. I thought that was pretty clear. I think that. You know, I would say this. What I thought was kind of strange about it was, and I know probably both of you have, we can all think of examples like this. Like there's been many times where people were challenged to a debate and they refused to debate them. Dr. Hotez with Bobby Kennedy comes to mind for me. But there's lots of examples like this, and sometimes that's reasonable, and sometimes it's not reasonable. Like I think in the case of Hotez, he should have debated Bobby Kennedy. But at the same time, I've been challenged to debate flat earthers and people with 150 followers, and I'm not particularly interested in doing that. So sometimes you'll see people who go, they'll take the path of like, look, this person's beneath me. I'm not going to debate this issue. I have no interest in doing this. And then sometimes people will agree to debate. I think Douglas Murray is the first person I've ever seen try to do both.
What?
And it made for kind of an interesting spectacle. If you're asking me if I think I won, I mean, you can let other people can have their opinion on that. Obviously, I'm biased in saying that. I think that the overwhelming reaction that I've seen is much more that Douglas Murray lost than I won. I think I was there to debate Ukraine and Israel, and Douglas was there. He made it more of a bigger kind of watershed moment about the experts versus the podcasters, which was not what I thought we were going to do. But I think in doing that, it's hard to even say win or lose. You're going into an environment where you couldn't have worked harder to turn the entire audience against you. Obviously, by definition, the audience of the Joe Rogan Experience are on the side of the podcasters being allowed to talk about these issues. And as I said...
Don't act like you say the same shit about not debating people without a following. First of all, I debate more people than probably like anyone else on the internet. So that's a funny accusation to make of me. Two, I do say that kind of, okay? Sure, but the funny thing is that I'm not somebody with just 150 followers, and Dave Smith religiously avoids me. I was just remarking more on the fact that he avoids me like the plague because he knows he'll be absolutely obliviated, okay, if he even tried to.
That in the debate, I don't think the expert class has a very good track record.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it, for what it's worth. I've had you both on my show, of course, a lot, and I enjoy watching you go at each other. I've seen lots of praise for you, Dave, indisputably, a lot. I've also seen, and we've just got a little summary of some of the lack of praise for you. Dave Smith was eviscerated by Douglas Murray, posted Henry Hobson. This is what happens when bluster and shallow thinking go up against a considered intellect. John Daly said watching someone like Douglas Murray absolutely crucify Dave Smith is a real treat. And Con Tomlinson, Dave Smith is ignorant, Douglas Murray crushed him. And the only reason I read those three out is it shows me that on social media in particular, when these kind of events happen, and I call them events because everybody watches them, when they do happen, there's very little middle ground. There are very little people who pop up on social media and go, you know what, on the one hand, I thought Dave made some good points. On the other, Douglas made some good points, and I really enjoyed the experience, which is probably what Joe Rogan thought. But no, we're in a very tribal world where before you guys even sat down together with Joe Rogan, they'd already decided you were going to be disintegrated, dismantled, and crucified. And similarly, a lot of people who like you and don't like Douglas Murray felt exactly the same way about what was going to happen to him. What does that tell you about discourse today, and what do we do about that, if anything?
What do we do about
that? Well, for the record, I will say, I mean, and I try to not live my life in a on internet comments, but for this one, I just could not help myself. But if you look at the YouTube comments or the Spotify comments, I mean, it's overwhelmingly hostile toward Douglas.
Oh my God!
It seems to me that there's every account
owned.
on Twitter with an Israeli flag and a Hebrew name in their bio certainly seem to think that I got my ass kicked. What's even more fascinating is that there'd be specific moments that people draw 180-degree opposite conclusions from. Like the one that I saw going super viral is him, asking me if I've ever been to Israel and then kind of putting on a performance about how shocked he is that I haven't been there. And it was interesting to me how different people could look at the exact same moment, and one group of people could say, oh, this was Dave getting destroyed. And the other group of people could say, I mean, like, objectively, this is a non-argument. This doesn't win you any points in a debate. Like, I obviously fall into the second group there, but it certainly does show you how dug in certain people are, of course, which I think is to be expected in this most of contentious issues. But yeah, I don't know exactly what to take from that, but much like in the last 5 years particularly, it does feel like people are living in different realities. And even if you were to ask people to tell the story of COVID, I mean, like, what just happened over the last 5 years with this global pandemic, it's amazing how much people could have completely diametrically opposed understandings of the reality we just lived through. Now, I'm not being a relativist here. I think one of those sides is wrong and the other one is right, but that is where we are.
Epic, bro.
Funny enough, I would say the COVID debate is a lot more nuanced in reality than the two extremities take it, for what it's worth. But let's bring in John Spencer, because he certainly was not in the Dave Smith one camp. You tweeted, Dave Smith and Douglas Murray debated who qualifies as an expert and who should be making declarative statements about certain wars. That question answers itself. And that's been construed, John, to mean that you believe that Dave Smith was not the expert in the room. Explain why you felt that Dave Smith lost this debate.
Sure. I wouldn't say it had anything to do with Douglas. I would have to say it was the statements that Dave Smith made during the podcast, which highlight, and I won't get into the credentialism as Dave's quoting four-star generals or who's an expert, who's not. I do research. I think Dave tells jokes for a living. Ooh. I had a problem with the statements he were made, and then how do you come to that conclusion, which really does get to the podcaster world versus other individuals on how did you come to that opinion or that declarative statement, like Israel is intentionally killing civilians. I mean, there's like 10 different ways you can do research. You can do comparative, case study. And I think this is what Douglas was saying. If you haven't been there, then how are you getting to your conclusion? You ethnographic, you can go there and do interviews in Gaza like both Douglas and I have done with soldiers. What's going on? How are you doing it? You can do even historical archival data research. That's not what it appears that Dave does, and it seems to be more of a historical revisionism. Take a piece of data that you got and tell a really convincing narrative on how you got to your conclusion. But as somebody who has students, I mean, correlation is not causation is that famous phrase. When that story is actually just a lot of correlation and inferences, how did you get to your conclusion? How do you do that research? Forget the expertise and the credentialism. You're making a statement like it's true, and I know Dave's anti-war, and that's great, but you can't be anti-factual, and Dave, without Douglas, just made a bunch of not true statements.
God damn.
Now, I may be about to shock you with this, but tallow is an exceptional moisturizer. The oil in our skin shares many of the same fatty acids as tallow, making it
I didn't even know
impossible
that.
to
Did you
beat.
guys know that?
You can have silky soft skin, like me, with an all-natural alternative. There's no fillers, and it's much more than just a moisturizer. It can replace lotion, night cream, wrinkle cream, Neosporin, and much more. It's powerful enough to heal your skin, but it's safe enough to spread on your toast. And if you're looking for natural solutions,
holy shit, I'm gonna
what
start
about
eating
your
it.
Toothpaste. Van Man's Mint Bone Tooth Powder is packed with all the minerals and the nutrients needed to remineralize teeth. They use zero fluoride, SLS, glycerin, and foaming agents. The aim for all of Van Man Company's products is to be edible, especially those which are literally used in your mouth.
Yes.
Go to vanman.shop/discount/peers for 10% off. That's vanman.shop/discount/peers. Well, give some of the key examples of what you think were completely factually inaccurate.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think the over one, which is what me and Dave were talking over X, is that Israel is intentionally killing civilians, especially children. That's not a factual statement at all, because it doesn't even include the base information. So it's almost like, you just don't know the information you need to know to make that judgment. And, let's forget comparing it to a domestic situation like Dave continues to do on Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, others. Like, if somebody killed my kids and I know where he's at and I go to that apartment building and I kill everybody in it, that's murder. And that's what Israel is doing. And that's not true. Even you, Piers, have commented about Israel striking something and saying, look at the number of civilians. That's not acceptable. That's not how war works. It's not even how you would assess that situation, because it completely rules out what the law of war says about proportionality, about assessing what is the target, who is that individual, what's his value, concrete value, and then, which a lot of people leave out, is what precautions did Israel take, like we just saw recently, of calling everybody in the building saying, look, the terrorist is using this building for a military purpose. You must leave. You must get out of this area, or all the other steps, these civilian harm mitigation measures. So that one's a really huge one, but there are other ones, like when Dave said that there are more children that have died in this war than...
So just as an example of that, if you disagree with me, just go read on your own. I'm not going to relitigate all the international law debates. But if I know that there is an enemy combatant, and maybe I even, for whatever reason, somehow I've ascertained that this is a high-value target, and he's in an apartment building, and there are 20 civilians in there, and there's one like general guy, it could be the case that the advantages that are conveyed through killing that person to the invading military outweighs the loss of life of civilians. That type of strike, you can do a proportionality assessment, and that type of strike, insofar as the rules of war are concerned, could be a completely and totally legitimate strike. The idea that you are always forbidden from attacking some place because there are civilians there, that's just not how war is seen by international law. And it might seem bad initially when you think about it, but if you think about it for 2 seconds more, the obvious reason why this is the case is because, remember, for rules for war, you're trying to protect civilians, but you're also trying to protect a country's ability to conduct war. And if it was the case that every single time there was a civilian somewhere, it was made illegal to attack that place, then obviously people would just hide among civilians all the time, and it would always be a war crime to ever attack civilians, and it was just like, it would just be dumb, right?
In any modern war. That's just, of course, Douglas called that out, but there was a whole list of them, from the blockade, from the occupation, like all of these things were just counterfactual and not a logic that leads to a conclusion, but he's really convincing, and that's what I have a problem with.
All right, Dave, your response.
Sure. Well, okay. I mean, I do think that, like, you do a lot of this, as Douglas did, a lot of this poisoning of the well stuff and saying you tell jokes and I do research, and you could say this isn't credentialism all you want to, but it's really a lot before you start taking on an actual argument. In fact, it wasn't until the follow-up question that you pointed anything out. So to the analogy that I'm making, and as you were quoting me on Twitter the other day, I'm not saying that I'm not familiar, although I'm not claiming to have your level of expertise with international humanitarian law, or you can assert that war works a different way. I'm talking about something much more fundamental. What I'm saying is that Douglas is making the claim, and many others are, that Israel's killing of civilians is unintentional. And I'm talking about a very basic philosophical.
So he's going to say basic philosophical, but when you say intentional, the word intentional can mean two things here, right? Let's say that Hitler is standing behind a child, and Hitler is saying, if you kill me, you're going to have to kill this child first. Fuck you. All right? And then let's say that you see that and you're like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's go. And you shoot through the child and you kill Hitler. Well, the question then that one could ask is, okay, well, did you intentionally kill a child? Well, in a way, you kind of intentionally killed a child, but that wasn't the intention of the attack. The intention wasn't to kill the child, right? The intention was to kill Hitler, and the child unfortunately, was collateral damage. It was standing right in front of Hitler. There was no other way to do the attack. There was nothing else you could do, right? So when you ask these questions of intentionality, it is illegal, as per the rules of combat, it is illegal to intentionally kill civilians such that you are just targeting civilians. A civilian can't be the target of an attack for the purposes of killing a civilian. But there is some degree of collateral damage that is allowed as per the rules of war. That's how that works. Now, does that count as it? That's probably what they're about to argue over, is what does intentional mean there, but...
philosophical concept of morality.
Did you intentionally ruin your audio? What is this guy saying? Wait, hello? Okay, I don't know. Good one.
Of intentionality, and that by what people mean when they say intentional, that if this was done domestically, we would.
He spammed this thing. I don't know why. He's trolling audio jokes. Okay.
By what people mean when they say intentional, that if this was done domestically, we would consider it intentional. The point is that war, yes, look, there's been the Geneva Convention, there's international humanitarian law. It goes back to the mid-19th century, was codified into law after World War II. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a step in the right direction. But this is all A politician or a group of politicians declaring a word, and the fact that there are lines drawn on a map.
It's just so stupid because this is just, I don't even know what to say. I'm not trying to be an elitist because I'm a fucking casual retard too. It's not like I know a ton of stuff about this, although compared to Dave Smith, I'm a fucking genius. But like, it's like if you're just gonna say like, oh LOL, it's just the law. Oh LOL, it's just words on paper. Oh LOL, it's just a border. Oh LOL, like Dave Smith when talking about immigration, borders are the realest and most important fucking thing. Dave Smith when talking about international laws of our country, like they're just like words on paper, and it's just words on a map, and it's just borders that are drawn with a bit. Like, come on, like you can't pick and choose here. Like this stuff matters.
Does not in any way magically transform morality or the basic philosophical concept of intent. And even in your example there, if I were to give out pamphlets, give out a warning, tell everybody I'd really like you to leave, and then they didn't, and I blew up a building, we would consider that intentional murder. Now, my point, I think a lot of times people object to almost what the implications of this way of looking at the world might be, but forget all of that for a second. I'm just talking about how human beings think about these things. And when you talk—
Couldn't Israel or anyone take advantage of the proportionality argument? Yeah, of course you could, theoretically, on that side. Yeah, you see one terrorist go into an apartment complex and there are 10,000 civilians in there, and you're like, I'm gonna fucking bomb the whole thing because he's really important. You could, yeah. That would be a case for like an international criminal court or somebody to decide or to go through, right? I'm not saying that you can't look at the attacks Israel does and try to make an independent assessment of, do we feel like they're following, these concepts like proportionality and distinction. Like, I think it's totally fine to engage in that analysis. Just understand that's the analysis you're engaging in. It's not, the analysis is not, did any civilians at all die? And if the answer is yes, then it's illegal. That's not how that works. Or even, did they target a building knowing civilians were in there? That's not illegal. That's not how that works.
Talk about an intentional killing. Now, by the way, I should also stipulate that it's not as if that's the case in every single one of these strikes that Israel's taken, and we've gotten all types of evidence.
Is Dave just saying people feel bad when innocent people die? He's taking a very crude, very basic, very level one. Dave Smith is kind of like that libertarian dude who's 17 years old in high school. He just finished reading his first Ayn Rand book, Atlas Shrugged or something, and he's like, oh my God, bro, I actually understand like all of morality and everything, and I'm gonna come and like tell everybody like how it is. He's like that guy. He's just never stopped to think for like more than 2 seconds. Well, hold on. Let's assume that you hold this moral principle. Let's look at some of the logical extensions of this moral principle. If you follow through on this, what kind of a world does that create? How do other people act with these moral rules that you've crafted? Because if people act in a way that is highly detrimental to, other people's rights, I guess you could say broadly speaking, well, then we probably have to go back and kind of like take another look at what it is we're talking about exactly.
About this, and there's quite a number of cases, hundreds of cases, where they're waiting for terrorists to go back into a residential building and then attacking the building, suspected terrorists, I should say. But regardless, none of this is even really the point. The point is that on a very basic human level, and I would also
Isn't his argument that it's immoral, though, not necessarily illegal? It just feels like there's no point to Israel's war right now, and it won't accomplish anything besides consequence. That's a separate argument. If you want to have that argument, it might even be a true argument, by the way. I don't know. But I'm sorry, but like you have to factor in legality. And one of the most important reasons why you have to factor in legality is because it determines, one, how likely people are. Okay, when we make laws, we want people to follow them. That's the most important part, right? You want to have people that follow laws, and you want to have laws that are followable. Otherwise, like, well, what the fuck is the point? What are we actually doing here? If we're creating things that people aren't even going to follow. So that's the most important thing. And if you craft a set of laws that make it so that you reward human shields to an unbelievable extent, well, countries just aren't going to follow these laws. They're going to say, well, fuck it, you're going to criminalize all my behavior anyway, so fuck this. So the laws have to be created in such a way that they make sense, that they allow countries to conduct war. The second thing that's nice about laws too is laws to some extent kind of give you a guiding light to determine how other people will act. Because if you guys all agree that there is some kind of law, some kind of rule to how the war is conducted or how warfare is conducted, then it gives you a little bit more certainty in terms of predicting the actions of other people as well. When we like stability, we like predictions to some extent. It's important for the world.
I think this is completely incompatible with Christianity, although I'm not trying to lecture anybody about that. But there is no micro and macro morality. There is no micro and macro intentionality. These are human concepts. And if,
like, when he says there's no micro or macro morality, like moral principles can change a little bit depending upon what it is exactly that we are talking about, right? Like, it's like you can never, I think John Spencer gave the idea, you can't, if somebody wronged you, you can't go into their house and kill them. But a police officer could theoretically go to their house and arrest them, and they could stand trial, and they could be convicted of a crime, and then of a horrible class 1 felony or whatever, and then they could be sentenced to death, and the state could kill them. Those two things are not the same thing, right? It's not just a matter of micro and macro morality. It's a matter of what's the context of this that we're talking about, right? You can't make a moral rule like you can never kill somebody ever, really. Like that's obviously self-defense is the obvious exception there, and we can find others too, but.
If you are dropping a bomb and you know that there are women and children on the receiving end of that bomb, then that was done intentionally. And I think this is the reality of war.
And like, I wish John Spencer would I wish he would just ask this question. I don't know if he's going to, but what he should ask is he should say, oh, okay. So then what do you do? What do you do if an enemy combatant is conducting warfare from inside of a residence? What do you do? Are you just... You can't do anything. You're completely unable to respond in any way, size, shape, or form. You just have to sit there and have all your people get blown up. Is that the rule? And is that something you think most nations would follow?
And I think if we're going to have a conversation about this, we should deal with it in reality.
Yeah, and also, John, I'll get you to respond to that. But I mean, it just seems to me, having done so many debates about this since October the 7th, I've never disputed that Israel had a right to defend itself, in fact, a duty to defend itself and its people from any further attacks of that magnitude, given how horrific it was. So let me just restate that again. But there's a kind of unique battlefield in Gaza. I would argue, and maybe you would argue differently, that you've got 2 million people, 50% of whom are under 18. And that the enemy are all living in civilian areas amongst the civilians. So you have a kind of horrific battleground, if you like, to attack if you're Israel, in the sense that you can only constantly kill a lot of civilians, including children, if you go after the enemy in those civilian areas. And that's exactly what's happened. And I can't think of a similar war, and maybe you can, you're more experienced at this, I accept, than I am, but can you think of another scenario where...
Oh, fuck. I wonder if you would chat with me. Wait, hold on. I can bring him on after this. Spencer Guard, right? It is this guy. It is. Okay. Okay, good luck.
The proportion of children that is in the attack zone has been at 50% or higher, and therefore we're seeing so many children being killed.
So, look, yeah, that's the case study or comparative model that you could do the research on. How does this compare to anything else? And it doesn't, right? The 20 years of preparing Gaza for war, the 400 miles of tunnels, the human sacrifice strategy, because both sides actually have legal obligation. And when Hamas says, I need the death of my women and children, that's not right. So the data about what is the population. So one, I don't want to be, heartless about it. And every death of a child is terrible. But you're evaluating anybody who's below the 18 as a child. As in, that Hamas has basically chilled. I joined the military at 17. Am I a child? And Hamas deploys. The average age of a Hamas recruit right now is 16 and a half. We've seen them put weapons in hands of very young children. You have combatant and you have non-combatant. Is there any comparable status to the demographic of Gaza? No. Is there any comparison to where another country, Egypt, refuses to let even those that want out from the combat areas, and Israel, who took weeks to evacuate the civilians from the areas they're going into? So absolutely, there are so many here, but back to Dave's comment, which it stands on itself, explaining what he doesn't know about war or the laws of war, about them being codified and when they went into effect, or this is a simple question of morality that war should be no killing of civilians. That should be it. You two military should go find your place to fight and just have it out. That's not the history of war from the creation, literally, of city-states going out and everything.
Again, I think
you want to get into the frameworks to judge. No, the frameworks to judge war. We as societies, all the societies of war, the Geneva Conventions is one example, have decided here are the boundaries of brutality of war. Like, we don't bomb innocent civilians. And you cannot say, I don't care what your Haaretz articles say, you're not going to show me that Israel has targeted civilians, intentionally killing civilians. When I can show you measures that Israel has taken that no military in the history of war have taken to get civilians out of harm's way so they can target that terrorist, You once said on a podcast, if the terrorist is holding a baby and shooting at you, then of course you can kill the terrorist. And unfortunately, what they're doing is wrong. But then I understand that when we have cases of Hamas doing that, holding children so nobody will shoot at them, or going underneath a hospital, a school, a mosque, doing what we call lawfare. You have to have an understanding of the evolutions of the law of war, how it is adjudicated. When you say evidence, I mean evidence, not TikTok videos. I mean actual evidence of what did the person dropping the commander know? What did he do to prevent it? What time did he do it? What type of munition did he use? Dave's statement, stand on his own, of showing that he doesn't know the foundations of war, even if it's what you call a just war, just execution of the war. You're just not communicating that you know enough to make a statement like that. I'm just philosophically talking.
Asmongold just said, thank God Trump is not listening to the Supreme Court. Really?
About killing civilians is wrong. That's what the law of war says. It says don't target civilians. Yeah. What Hamas did on October 7th. It doesn't say 0 civilians will die in a war. There's a precaution law of war. There is the feasible things you do to prevent the civilian death. But you can't say Israel hasn't done that. And I'm saying, based on my research, not an appeal to expertise, going there, interviewing IDF soldiers, commanders, Netanyahu himself, I'm saying Israel is not targeting or intentionally trying to kill civilians. They're doing the opposite, more than anybody else.
Piers Morgan Uncensored is now proudly independent. If you like the show, we ask only one thing. Subscribe on YouTube and follow Piers Morgan Uncensored on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Now let's get straight to the point. Support for today's show comes from a business focused on a critical issue, prosperity. US national debt is at crisis levels. Inflation has made life more expensive for everybody, and the stock market is precarious. It's enough to make anyone's financial future feel grim. So what is the solution? Well, a simple one is to opt out of the chaos and invest in something solid and reliable: physical gold and silver. And there's only one name you need to remember: American Hartford Gold. This company has earned the trust of thousands of customers with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and glowing reviews you can see for yourself. They offer an incredible range of gold and silver bars and coins. They can be delivered directly to your door, or they'll help you set them up in a tax-advantaged gold IRA.
Damn.
First-class customer service makes the whole process simple, secure, and straightforward. American Hartford Gold is committed to getting the truth out there and giving you peace of mind in uncertain times. And if that wasn't enough, you'll get up to $15,000 worth of free silver when you make your first purchase and mention my name, Piers. So make the smart move. Call 866-692-2474 or text Piers, that's P-I-E-R-S, to 65532. That's 866-692-2474 or text Piers to 65532. All the details are in the description. Now on with the show.
Okay.
Again, I mean, Dave, that last point, that last point John made, and obviously respond to everything he said, but the last point about he's been there, you know, one of Douglas Murray's attack lines with you was that unlike him, who regularly goes to Israel, he regularly goes to Ukraine, you don't go to these places that you then opine on. You know, personally, I don't think you need to go to the sun to know it's hot. But you know, a lot of people agree with Douglas Murray and say, yeah, you know, actually he's right. If you don't actually go, how can you really know what you're talking about? And John's kind of inferring that as well. What do you say to that?
No, Piers, I'm not inferring
yeah, that's
that
the
you have
worst
to go there.
version of that argument. It's not even true. Just do research.
If you're not doing interviews of people involved in the actions, if you're not collecting data in a certain way, which you can get from going there, you can do ethnographic research by interviewing the people involved in the execution. I'm not saying that straw man of, well, Dave's not been there, so he can't talk. If Dave did research, then absolutely. If Dave didn't have giant logical holes in what he's saying, like about the blockade or about the bombing or things like this, then you don't have to go there. There are many ways to do research. I'm saying Dave doesn't do that.
Okay, so I'll say this. It's both. I feel like both in this debate and in the debate with Douglas Murray, it almost kind of feels like the analogy I'd use is like if two fighters agreed to fight. You know, two guys in the UFC, they agree to fight, and so they show up under the lights, and you get into the cage, and I put my hands up, and then the other guy puts his hands down and starts telling me what a better fighter he is than me. And you're like, okay, well then let's do it. Like, I don't know, let's have the conversation. Like, instead of all this time just telling me you're an expert. Hold on, wait 1 second. Let me finish my point since you had some time to talk there. Look, all of this stuff about like whether you have to be there. By the way, it's going viral online, but there's this great clip of Douglas Murray taking apart the lived experience argument from the left and making all these points about how
they clipped this guy up so hard. By the way, it's fucking epic. They clipped this dude up so fucking hard, and it's going viral. By the way.
Were never in the Holocaust have written much more beautiful.
Adult man, by the way.
and accurate about the Holocaust than people who actually went through it themselves. If you want to say that you gain some, if you want to say you have expertise, or you want to say going there gives you some more expertise, then sure. I mean, I wouldn't argue that. No one's arguing that you can't learn about a place from going there. But again, this is the fighter putting his hands down and going, I've trained so much harder than you. I'm such a better boxer than you. You could never hang with me. It's like, okay, so let's get it going. Anyway, in terms of, by the way, there's absolutely no chance, and I haven't examined Douglas Murray's passport, but there's no chance that he's not a hypocrite on this issue. I guarantee he has not been to all of the places that he's commented on. I don't know. He's commented on every foreign country and what's going on geopolitically for 20 years. I'm sure he hasn't visited all of those places. Back to the point, because it seems like in these things we do everything except actually debate the issue. You missed my entire point. Once you're appealing to the law or appealing to how warfare actually works,
you lose.
You're missing the entire point.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about stuff that I would have to actually read and research about, bro. Just like, let's just talk about like kind of our feelings about like what we think international warfare should be and what it should look like based on, you know, videos and movies and games.
I was making. My point is that this is not how the law works, and this is not how war actually works. I'm making a much more basic human point, a fundamental point. Look, Pierce, the other day, okay, this is, and by the way, if you don't want to believe this story, it's fine. It's just one firsthand account from Gaza. But whether it's true or not, and there's no reason to suspect it's not true, but whether it's true or not, there's just been hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of examples like this. But so there was a woman, a building collapsed. She says, as she's walking down the building, she can hear the little kids, not 16-year-old members of Hamas. You're talking 4- and 5-year-olds screaming for their mothers while they're buried underneath the rubble, screaming for help from their mommy. And you know what, Pierce? No help is coming because there's no bulldozers.
What is even the point of this story? What the fuck? Jesus.
Nobody's coming to get those kids out. This is the reality of war. And this is what I'm trying. This is the main point that...
Use the restroom. One sec.
that I was trying to make to Douglas Murray, which he kept running away from. If you're going to say that our goal here, while they're buried underneath the rubble, screaming for help, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of examples like this. So there was, believe this story, it's fine. It's just one firsthand account from Gaza. But whether it's true or not, and there's no reason to suspect it's not true, but whether it's true or not, there's just been hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of examples like this. So there was a woman, a building collapsed. She says, as she's walking down the building, she can hear the little kids, not 16-year-old members of Hamas. You're talking 4- and 5-year-olds screaming for their mothers while they're buried underneath the rubble, screaming for help from their mommy. And you know what, Pierce? No help is coming because there's no bulldozers in Gaza. Nobody's coming to get those kids out. This is the reality of war. And this is what I'm trying. This is the main point that I was trying to make to Douglas Murray, which he kept running away from. If you're going to say that our goal here is to degrade Hamas, Murray conceded you probably can't eliminate them, but he feels like you can degrade them. If you're going to degrade Hamas, and the cost of it is those little children dying under rubble, screaming for their mother as their bones are crushed and no one's coming to help them, then fine. but at least say that you find that price acceptable. And then we could have a real conversation about why people are going to view you as a monster and why the other side will never stop fighting and will always be against you. Because I could tell you for sure, if that was my kids, and I know, Pierce, if those were your kids as well, you wouldn't want to hear anything about how, well, we've codified in international law that this is the norm of the way wars are allowed to be fought versus not allowed to be fought. I'm making a very human point that this is the reality of war. And you can say under international humanitarian law, it's not considered intentional. We would consider this an intentional act in any other area. That's the point. It's a very basic human point that if anyone were to do this domestically and then tried to use the defense of like, no, but I dropped a leaflet. No, I didn't really want to kill them. I just wanted to kill them. We'd go, I don't care. You blew up a building knowing there were kids in there. That's the essence of this whole thing. And there's no amount, there's no amount of expertise that can really get you away from this basic fundamental moral logic.
Damn. Basic.
He's not good. Difficult. Hang on, John. Hang on, John. I will come to you. I just wanted to ask you, let's go back to the end of World War II.
Okay.
And the dropping of 2 atomic bombs in Japan, which obviously caused huge loss of life. And I imagine by your criteria, that was a deliberate targeting of.
Oh, he's just. I think this is a super easy one for Dave Smith. My guess is Dave Smith's going to say, oh yeah, America was evil when we did that. Also, isn't it funny that America is telling the rest of the world not to go after nuclear weapons when we're the only people that have ever actually fucking nuked somebody, LOL? That's my guess. Maybe I'm wrong.
Civilians. The argument in favor of doing it was that it brought an end to World War II and potentially saved millions more lives from being taken. In other words, there's your moral argument right there, is that you do this to stop this. You take this number of lives to stop many more lives being killed. I mean, when you look at that, for example, what's your view of that moral debate?
Okay, well, first of all, just on the specifics, and we have talked about this before, but I tend to agree with 5-star General Dwight D. Eisenhower that it was unnecessary and wrong for us to drop the nuclear weapons. But regardless of that, even if 5-star General Eisenhower is wrong about that, and the other generals who supported it were right, this is exactly the point, Pierce, is that when you start to think about war for what it actually is, what the overwhelming onus.
I love that he didn't actually give an argument there. He literally just cited what a 5-star general said, right? When ordinarily that appeal to expertise is not a legitimate way to have a conversation. But he didn't give the argument of the 5-star general or whatever. He just kind of like said it. He's like, well, this guy said it wasn't necessary to win the war, but you know. Interesting.
Becomes clear, and the onus is on you to demonstrate that we absolutely have to do this. That the standard for war, when you're talking about intentionally killing innocent civilians, the standard ought to be, the burden should always be on you to demonstrate that we absolutely have to do this. I know this is horrible. I know what the result of this is, but that we have to do this because so much more human suffering would come from us not doing this. And this is, to me, the essence of the point of why I talk about war in this way, is that because if you don't think about it this way, it ends up being very easy to find other justifications, justifications like Hamas must go. Hamas must go. It's like, whoa, hold on, wait a second. I kind of think Hamas must go. I kind of think the Likud party must go. I definitely think Kim Jong-un must go. I kind of think Vladimir Putin must go. But that's not the standard for whether.
He did appeal to expertise. How it didn't even occur to me. Yeah, he does this all the time. Murray pointed it out as well, that he'd never trust any U.S. intelligence, any U.S. State Department, any U.S. agency, anything. But you better fucking believe that when he's talking about some conspiratorial shit, dude, Dave Smith is the quickest person in the world to whip out that, well, what about when the ex-director of the CIA said this? Or what about when ex-director of the blah, blah, blah? I think it's because all the books that he reads has quotes and shit from these people. And so he'll whip one of those quotes out. We're like, ha, well. And it's like, okay, so when they give you something you like, you're just going to literally verbatim quote him and do the hardest appeal to expertise in your entire life. But when it's people you don't like, we're going to endlessly, be skeptical of any claims that they make. Gotcha. Okay.
Whether or not we're justified to just start slaughtering innocent people in the hope of achieving that end. What the standard ought to be is simply, do you absolutely have to do this, or there will be more human suffering? That should be the standard. And in the case of Israel-Gaza, I think that entirely changes the scope of things, because look, as all of us know, right? Gaza was, before October 7th, the most surveilled area in the world. Israel is the fortress of the world. It was a monumental failure of both policy and security for October 7th to have happened in the first place. And it's just not the case that there's going to be October 7th after October 7th if Israel just stops now and leaves Gaza in the rubble mess that it is. And so that's exactly, I'm not objecting. I get your point, Pierce, because you're almost going, wait, but if we follow this logic, then when could we ever fight a war? And essentially my point is that, yeah, the onus should be on anybody who wants to fight a war war, ever. The onus should be on them to demonstrate that it is absolutely necessary and that there's nothing else we could do in this situation.
Okay, John, your response.
Yeah, Piers, two UFC fighters enter a ring and one punches the other in the nose. And Dave says, how dare he punches him in the nose in this fight? That's the analogy. He's not making an appeal to facts, how the law of war works, how war works, whether it's the theory underneath the war or the
True. Actually, that analogy was way more succinct than mine from earlier, because he gave the fighter example earlier. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, fighters are allowed to fight each other. They've agreed to, and they are engaged in a fight. Ordinarily, you wouldn't be able to fight about that macro and micro morality or whatever, you know?
So a framework to understand it. He doesn't like theory like just war theory, things like that. But the framework that is...
What happened to Josh Shapiro's home? Don't believe the Josh Shapiro stuff. I don't know if it's because he's like bought into progressives or tankies, but I'm pretty sure what happened was I think his gay lover showed up to his apartment, because we've seen some of the camera footage, and I think that when they were like having their gay sex orgies, they tried to eat one of the children for the adrenochrome, and then that kid managed to escape, and then he dropped a match right before he left, and he said, "Fuck you, New World Order, satanic scum." And then his house caught on fire, his mansion caught on fire, and now they're trying to say that it was like some crazy conservative that did it, but
is there. Now he just said that one side has to show that there is a military necessity, he doesn't know these words, but that's what he's talking about, to actually enter the war. Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th.
I've never heard military necessity before. You blew my mind with your expertise.
Right, I know. It's
well,
like
you talk like you don't.
War 101 offline, that's fine. Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th. Israel invoked Article 51, a self-defense war in accordance with the United Nations, again, more frameworks that people need to know, and said Hamas will be destroyed, removed from political power, and the hostages returned. Now, David said that's not necessary, and that all Israel needs to do is put more men on the wall. That's what Dave said his solution, because he also doesn't study military theory on how do you win a war. He intermixes counterinsurgency theory with a war against removing a regime from power, defeating their military.
That's not what I was doing.
Factual. You said that was exact words on Lex Freeman. He's not making an appeal to facts. I'm debating. He's making an appeal to emotion and morals, not what the law.
That feel when the bad faith debater quotes you. Bad faith.
An appeal to logic and morals.
Yeah, he's appealing to logic, bro.
7th, Hamas is going to lose a war, and it's going to never be in power again. It's never, and Hamas is the one that says they want to do October 7th. But Dave said, just put the wall up. They won't be able to do it on October 7th ever again, right? You have this blockade, although there was 100 tunnels going from Egypt to Gaza to build this military that Hamas built. And he'll say that Netanyahu sent him money. He's not making an appeal to facts. This is what we have a problem with Dave Smith. He makes an appeal to emotion and does historical revisionism. And he tells these narratives that aren't true. So his
can I just tell you, Piers?
Fails. He's anti-war.
What's so funny about this, Piers? Okay, what's so funny about this, Piers, is that after all of this, once again, all of this, I'm an expert, you don't know this, I'm an expert, you haven't studied military 101, then after all of that, the substance of what we're left with is... Right, okay, got it. After all of that, the substance that we're left with is Hamas started the war on October 7th. Yes, the most basic point that every pro-Israel person has made on this show forever. That's what you've got here. Okay.
I got a fact.
It's not a fact. It's not a fact.
Israel could achieve that goal.
By the way, you also don't even know what an appeal. It's not an appeal to emotion, by the way. That's not what it is. Although you do seem to be flirting with an appeal to authority. No, it's an appeal to morality. For me to describe.
Wait, real quick. If I make these biolabs, I don't have to put fucking nutrients in them, do I? You do, yes. I guess you can make the nutrients out of the biter eggs.
The actual human impact of what this policy is resulting in. It's not an appeal to emotion. I mean, like, it's an appeal to morality, and it's an appeal to logic. An appeal to logic. Look, you can't answer me this very simple question, okay? Here's the very simple question, okay?
Okay.
Which you'd have to admit, look, let's take the worst example, just not your example where there's a Hamas rocket firing at Israel.
Give me Gaza. Don't give me a hypothetical and the morals of the law of war. Give me
I was about to. If you interrupted me, I was on my way to. Let's say Israel targets an area where there are 2 combatants and 2 civilians. It's your 1-to-1 ratio, okay? And they decide that's acceptable by the international laws of war or whatever. By the way, in your appeal to the international laws, we didn't mention the ICC warrant for Netanyahu, which they don't seem to be respecting that much. But anyway, but we're still, you can still appeal to this framework, even though they never have to live up to it. But let's just say, okay, the exact same action happened domestically. If someone were to do that, you would call it intentional murder, right? How does the concept of intentionality change? Because a politician uttered the word war, they declared it, and it's taking place in a foreign country.
Because you don't have police control over that other territory. It's not your responsibility. You don't have the control over those citizens. You're not there to arrest and investigate and hold accountable using some judicial system. It's just not, they're not your citizens. You can't do that. You can't go into another country and arrest their citizens. You can't do that. You're conducting war.
Without appealing to authority or appealing to law or appealing to what war normally is. Can you as a human being explain to me how the concept of intentional changes magically because a politician uttered the phrase war?
Go.
Well, the thing about the politician, it's the framework. So yes, I can give you...
No. He's asking for why the framework exists. Oh, fuck. I hope he answers this. There are good answers here. There's a reason why we treat these differently.
This is literally you're explaining in the question how you don't know how the framework of a war works.
Why does the framework? Why is it different? Why is it different? Why is it different?
Stop telling me I don't know and demonstrate it.
I didn't say you don't know. Your question, I'll teach you something. Your domestic law has a complete societal agreement on what those laws will be adjudicated and how they'll be determined. How a criminal...
Yes, it does. Oh my God, he's gonna... No, it doesn't. What are you talking about? Yes, we have a criminal system in every country in the world that I'm aware of. You have a set of laws on the books, and they're called crimes, or they've been prosecuted in the past, common law, whatever. You have crimes, and we all agree that they're bad, and you can be arrested for them and charged with a crime, and then convicted of the crime, and have your freedoms deprived in accordance with your nation's laws.
Societal agreement on what those laws will be adjudicated and how they'll be determined.
No, it doesn't.
How a criminal, the tyrants, absolutely, American law.
Lots of people don't agree to the law.
Oh, kill me! What? Oh, what is he doing? Sovereign citizen? Where do we go? Hello? What?
If you kill somebody, then you'll be convicted of a crime based on a jury and a judge, all this. Then you want to apply that on war, but then disregard what the laws of war, the things that all nations have agreed to on. This is how we account for intentionality.
You can't do it without making an appeal to the law. You can't do it. You can't explain it to me logically.
The body of laws have accounted for how do you get over that intentionality thing. If you use the same thing, which is when somebody says there's a war crime, or when you say Israel has intentionally targeted a civilian because, look, there's if you have to go to the statistical thing, we have issues unless you're doing comparative analysis. But if there's one combatant and one civilian, you don't know that. Okay, what is that?
He's not getting to the point of Dave's question, and it is a good question from Dave. A lot of people don't understand. Is, well, why don't we treat everything like a policing issue? And the reality is because you don't have policing powers in another country. You can only conduct war. You don't have the ability to imagine it was the case. I'm trying to think of something that's not super hyperbolic. I was gonna say, imagine your soldiers are in some country and a civilian rapes. Well, we can do that. Yeah, a civilian rapes one of your soldiers or something like this, right? Well, how do you deal with that? Do you arrest that citizen? Let's say in your country, rape is an automatic death sentence. Let's say in their country, rape is an automatic 20 years in jail. Well, whose system of laws do you even prosecute this person under? What if you have different ways of gathering evidence? What if you have different ways of assembling a jury? What if you have different ways of conducting the trial? You can't. These are two different incompatible systems of law. You don't have all of the policing powers in an enemy country that you would in your own country. It's not feasible. It wouldn't work.
Combatant. Is he a commander? Is he the commander? Is he a regular soldier? That accounts for what is the excessive collateral damage, and that's where intentionality gets into it. But, oh, by the way, what have you done to prevent it?
Didn't the dude begin to explain it, but Dave sidetracked him with the laws aren't social. Well, he's trying to get the reason. What Dave is asking, Dave doesn't even know how to form the question because he's so out of his depth in this conversation. But what Dave is trying to ask is, why is there a double standard when it comes to domestic issues versus international issues? And it's actually a very good question. And it's hard to, or you have to get into why both sets of rules exist in order to figure out why there is a different standard. For instance, if you've heard me complain on the stream about the UN's analysis of the Great March of Return, my issue with that analysis is that they analyzed it as a domestic policing event instead of an international armed conflict event, which leads you to a whole different set of conclusions. But if you're curious, I'm not gonna be able to find it. You can read the whole report where UN report analysis, Great March of Return. Imagine if it was just the first thing that I fucking clicked and found, and there was a link right to it, and it should be 200 some pages, not 22 pages. I don't want the abbreviated version. Oh, it's this. Oh my God. So this actually, and it's interesting. I disagree with where they wound up at, which I thought was insane. But I brought up that when I brought up continuous combat function, for instance. So part of the UN analysis on determining whether or not some things could be charged as a war crime had to do with the UN trying to figure out what do we consider an international armed conflict versus a policing event, right? Because there are things here that you don't do when you police, right? So distinction. Police officers don't distinguish between combatants and civilians. That's not a thing. Where it's okay to kill like combatants, but it's not okay to kill civilians. You don't kill anybody if you're a police officer unless somebody represents like a significant threat to somebody's life. You can't just if you think somebody's running away and they burglarize something, you can't just shoot and kill that person because I identified them. I made the distinction between civilian that's not there. Proportionality, in a very abstract way, might apply to police officers, but no, not generally. You don't engage in proportionality assessments. You don't blow up buildings to kill murderers in the United States of America or in any country as a policing event. There is no proportionality. You don't kill civilians to try to get the bad guys. And in terms of precautions, you don't do precautions for civilians because you're not doing either of these. You're not blowing civilians up ever. You don't warn a block. You guys need to leave because we think there's a big bad guy here, a murderer, so we're going to blow your whole block up, right? So these are the three, this is like the triangle of analyses that international humanitarian law rest on, are these three principles. And in the UN report here, they kind of go over, well, what's the difference? Actually, I think, I don't even know why I just said all this, because actually I think they say literally all of this. So for instance, if you're doing armed conflict between two states, distinction. Parties to a conflict must distinguish between civilians and civilian objects on one hand, and military forces and military objectives on the other. Attacks may only be directed against the latter, including civilians who directly participate in hostilities. Now, when they say direct, they mean targeted, not just for damage, but like you're targeting a thing. For law enforcement, no similar principle in law enforcement, as the use of force is presumed to be against civilians. That too, right? Your criminals, there is no distinction. There's nobody to distinguish against. Everybody's a civilian, right? Yeah. Prevention or precautions. Parties must take all feasible measures to avoid, and in any event, to minimize incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects. For prevention precautions on the law enforcement side, state agents must avoid the use of force as far as possible. When unavoidable, state agents must seek to minimize harm to human life and property as much as possible. Oh, that's another thing too. If there are 10 enemy soldiers, and I think I could take those soldiers down using like stun guns, I don't have an obligation for my military to engage in that form of taking those soldiers down. But if you had a police officer and you thought that there were a group of rowdy, men that were causing problems, you do have an obligation in most countries to have some kind of continuum of force policy where you don't just come in guns blazing unless they're black. You have to actually like do something to restrain somebody in a initially verbally, then in some confrontational way physically, and then through some kind of stun gun or taser up to maybe lethal force if it gets to that point. Just kidding about the black thing. But whatever. Yeah, this is important, but. I'm sorry. The reason why I'm saying this is because all these laws and stuff exist for good reason. There's good rationalizations behind all of these. And I will admit that when I first started reading into all of this, it all seemed like an arbitrary hodgepodge of retarded bullshit anyway. I was like, why would you even have these? This sounds fucking retarded. Why are some things legal domestically, like tear gas, but illegal in terms of like armed conflict? Like, how is it even possible? But there are good reasons that underpin all of these principles. And it behooves you to learn them if you want to debate about them, at least on international TV. But whatever, Okay.
Domestic situation, you'd send the police to go get that criminal and then try them in it.
Oh, he's getting there. He's
collateral
getting there.
damage, and that's where intentionality gets into it. But oh, by the way, what have you done to prevent it? In the domestic situation, you'd send the police to go get that criminal and then try them. In war, if you're a member of the other military in which I'm at war against, I don't have to have an excuse. I can kill you on sight.
Yep.
Yeah, no,
okay,
I know.
very quickly,
Again,
before I let you...
Hang on, Dave. There are logistical differences.
He was getting
Hang on, Dave. Hang on, Dave. Dave's going to stay with me when Eric wants. Hang on, guys. Hang on, John. We're going to let you go, John. Before we let you go, I want to ask you just one thing that also came out of the debate with Douglas and.
How does this change if the country the crime was committed in is occupied? So that's a really good question, because occupation does change things. And when you've occupied a country, you do have an obligation to act as a more of a policing force than identifying everybody as an enemy combatant. However, the UN engages... No, they don't actually. Fuck. I don't think they do engage in that analysis. They completely bullshit their way through it. Fuck, what the fuck did I just... Why is this not in my history? It is. It was probably right there, and I'm just fucking retarded. The occupying thing and whether or not you count as an occupying power, there are, it's so funny because I think they list out how to make that determination and then they just don't engage in the analysis at all. One of the reasons why I say sometimes it's important to read the underlying reports is like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, everything the UN makes is trash. This is a really good report on what happened during the Great March of Return. It has a lot of good factual claims in it, and it's got a lot of good, it's a well-done report. I just think the legal analysis and conclusions are wild. But in there, going through the methodology of it, they bring up like a lot of good principles. I don't know why they didn't apply them. Hold on, fuck. I think they go through... okay, so occupation law. So this is why Israel would argue, and I would agree, that the Gaza Strip was not under occupation insofar as this kind of analysis would go. So, quote, territory is considered occupied when it is actually placed under the authority of the hostile army. The occupation extends only to the territory where such authority has been established and can be exercised. So when you're talking about like establishing authority, we might be talking about how to do your tax system or administration stuff or your policing force, stuff like this, right? It's under the authority of something. If somebody commits a crime, you've got to report it to the occupying power, and then they're basically kind of working in these mini de facto administrators. De facto meaning in practice, as opposed to de jure, which means in actuality in writing, right? So they're basically like your little de facto government, kind of, at least temporarily, for an occupation. This provision of the Hague Regulations of 1907 is recognized as customary international humanitarian law. Customary just means that everybody acts like it's legal, so it has become legal. It's part of law. Including by Israel, the legal standard by which to measure whether belligerent occupation has been established is the effective control test. The test may be summarized as follows. One party's armed forces are physically present in the territory of another party without the consent of the local sovereign authority, i.e. the boots on the ground element. So for Gaza, it very clearly fails this one. While there might be IDF soldiers on the border, IDF soldiers were not on the ground inside the Gaza Strip. The presence of the foreign armed forces displaces the local sovereign authority. That's not the case. Hamas was the local sovereign authority. They did all of their local and domestic policing and all of the administrative stuff. And the foreign forces have established or can readily establish their own authority, superseding that of the pre-existing local authority. This is obviously not true because they had to literally go to war and, do a whole ass invasion or whatever in order to establish their own authority or to supersede the local authority from Hamas there, right? So I feel like on all three of these points, it's pretty obvious. You might be able to nibble around the edges of some of it, but not really. It would be hard to imagine that if all three of these points existed, Hamas would have ever even have been able to carry out said terrorist attack. But then the way that the UN gets around this is the UN just cites a couple of UN resolutions where the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are just referred to as the occupied territories, and they say, therefore, we're going to consider them occupied. It's like, well, that's kind of fucking retarded because that's not what any of those resolutions were about. These paragraphs, I think, have to do with in 2004, 2005, when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip. Then Israel claimed, well, they're no longer an occupied thing. Oh, so the ICRC in 2012 assessed that Israel occupies Gaza. While the shape and degree of this military occupation have varied, Israel has continuously maintained effective control over the territories, that includes the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, it occupied as a result of the Six-Day War in 1967 and over the Palestinian population living there. And the occupied Palestinian territory, that is, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, the applicable legal framework is the law of belligerent occupation. Israel's obligations under occupation law are commensurate with the degree to which it exercises control. This is basically the only thing they do. They just quote this, but they don't actually engage in the analysis, which I thought was funny and retarded. But okay, sorry, that was way too long of a sidestep. This stuff exists for good reason. It's okay to read about it sometimes. If Israel's not occupying Gaza, what the fuck are they doing then? Like, what is the relationship with Gaza? Well, right now, you would say they probably are, for sure. After October 7th and they invade, sure. But I was saying prior to the October 7th invasion and after 2005 when they disengaged.
Dave, which was this issue of whether people who have what most people believe to be bad faith, deliberate conspiracy theory nonsense views. For example, Daryl...
I mean, for the West Bank, you can make arguments about occupation in relation to settlements. I don't know if you could make the full occupation argument there, but you could get a hell of a lot closer, and you might be able to, sure, because the IDF regularly deploys forces out there in order to do policing matters. So I don't know if the argument could be all the way made, but you have a much, much, much stronger argument for an occupation in the West Bank. And I would say, like, for East Jerusalem, I think Israel literally annexed it. So obviously that's part of the Israeli state. So it would just be domestic law stuff. You couldn't do military armed conflict operations there.
Deliberate conspiracy theory nonsense views. For example, Daryl Cooper saying Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War, whether people like Daryl Cooper should be platformed on...
Wait, what was that document? This, here you go. Have fun.
Gigantic podcasts like Joe Rogan or not, particularly if they're not going to be really vigorously challenged on what is something that to me is such an obviously untrue and offensive premise. What's your quick view of that?
Wait. Destiny is on the difference between international countries' law. He's just being unclear about that, I think. I don't know what this argument is about. Okay.
I think that we should not platform historical revisionists who go back in time and find a fact and then tell it in a certain way to spin the narrative of what we should know about events. If you want to look at Daryl Cooper, look at the list of deleted tweets from Daryl Cooper. I'm against intellectual. Again, no expertise involved. Anybody can research whatever they want.
Yikes.
And they come out with a new
It's over
finding.
for you, bro.
That's great. Using evidence, using data, using a research methodology. But no, you don't get to be a historical revisionist like Dave.
Damn.
Actually, I do.
Okay, John Spencer, thank you very much indeed. Well, Dave, I'm going to let you respond, but with Eric. So I'm going to say goodbye to John. John, thank you. It was a riveting debate between you two. I really appreciate it. Well, joining us now with some final thoughts on the debate, a man who can claim to be friends with Joe Rogan, with Dave Smith, and with Douglas Murray, and I would like to think now with me, Harvard mathematician, the founder of the intellectual dark web, Dr. Eric Weinstein, has just returned from his own research trip to Israel, and Dave is staying with us. So, Eric, great to see you. Just on that point, Eric, about platforming people. It seems to me Daryl Cooper is one of those characters out there at the moment who are promoting something they know to be untrue. It's a bit like Alex Jones when he went after the Sandy Hook families and said it was all a hoax. They're promoting something that is deliberately untrue but can be commercially very lucrative to them. Should those people who are making good money from perpetrating, in my estimation, obvious lies...
Is this the schizo brother? I don't know who's more schizo at this point. They're both fucking insane, unfortunately. Serious question. Doesn't it feel weird to you to be so critical of the UN's analysis while there doesn't seem to be any widely credible scholars with the same critiques, or do I just not know them? No, they're there. There are people that criticize it. The thing is, though, like the Israeli analysis stuff is just not very interesting because most of the answers are fairly obvious unless you are very ideologically driven to support the Palestinian side, which is why that's where the overwhelming amount of writing and quote unquote scholars and everybody else is like fixated. It's because you have to try to make excuses for a side that engages in, you know, civilian shielding and never fighting in uniform. How is it that this side must be morally better than the other side?
Should they be given platforms?
That loads the question a bit. Look, everybody's doing something different online. I mean, somebody could say you're making good money from holding conflicts and shouting matches that play into the inguinal desire for...
Somebody in chat said it, but nothing is... They just never even state the accurate criticisms. The problem is not that you shouldn't ever platform a single person ever. The issue is, like, can you provide adequate pushback when you platform them? That's what people are talking about. But I guess we just have literally no capability of ever honestly providing any kind of summary of what the other person's position is. So here we are, I guess. Okay.
For combat, you know, and in a certain sense, we're all making money doing something, hopefully.
Good one, dude.
The problem is, what is anyone's intention? And one of the problems of knowing Daryl Cooper is that the shitposting Daryl Cooper and the thoughtful Daryl Cooper are not always the same person, easily reconciled. Many people talk about having sort of, this is the way I am online, this is the way I am in a different place. And, you know, the odd thing about that is that this mirrors a tradition in academics that is not much discussed, which is the esoteric-exoteric tradition, in which typically a scholar behaves one way in the seminar room and another way when his or her words might influence policy. And so even if you're in the heterodox movement, I'm sure that Donald Trump is keeping his own counsel about what he intends to do with tariffs. He's doing an esoteric-exoteric routine. And so in part, the problem is that we haven't reconciled ourselves to the idea that we speak one way in front of the world, another way behind closed doors, and that this is actually natural and normal. And as a result, what we're doing is we're hauling out different people. We see that Fauci and Collins are, behaving one way behind the scenes, a different way in Congress. Daryl is the same way.
They're never in uniform because they aren't allowed to be. They don't have a fucking structure. No, they don't. Why would they wear a uniform? That would just be a tactical disadvantage. They just fight in civilian garb. And then they can also endlessly shitpost about how Israel is like indiscriminately slaughtering civilians intentionally, constantly, because they never bother to draw a distinction between enemy combatants and the civilian population.
I no doubt have my own version of esoteric, exoteric, and we're just not comfortable with it. And so in a certain sense, we're all waking up on the same day to the reality that this is a natural and normal part of scholarship, governance, civics, and personal life.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, it's an interesting one because I had Dan Balzerian on, who was spewing repulsive anti-Semitic crap to me for about half an hour before I finally ended it. But he has a big following and had been sort of going slightly down that road, and I felt it was right to challenge him. And then there was a big debate afterwards about whether I should give him the oxygen of being able to repeat this stuff on a big platform like Uncensored. I would say it was slightly different to what I think, because I think he may genuinely believe what he was saying. And it may be that Daryl Cooper does too. I don't know him. In Alex Jones's case, I mean, Elon Musk cancelled an interview with me because he saw a clip of me criticizing him for reversing his decision about whether allowing Alex Jones onto X, for example. His original position was he shouldn't be on X because he was dancing on the graves of children deliberately and was deliberately lying to make hundreds of millions of dollars out of making the grief of those poor families immeasurably worse. And I felt it was wrong to give someone like that a platform again on X. Now, it's an arguable point. But I guess my question for you would be, you're a libertarian. You clearly think Daryl Cooper should be platformed. And I heard that strongly when you were talking to Douglas. But is there anyone who shouldn't be platformed? I mean, where is that line for a libertarian?
Well, I mean, the
Marketplace
libertarian position would be that it's up to the people who own the platforms to decide who they want to platform and don't. And our only red line would be that the government should never be in the business of deciding any of this. Can I say?
Does he have anything to say about Trump's administration and suing people that do things we don't like? Has he mentioned anything about that? I don't know where he stands on the whole Trump shit at the moment.
Though, yes, I love Daryl Cooper. He's a friend of mine, and I think his work is phenomenal. I am really beginning to resent the fact that every show I go on, I get asked about Daryl Cooper, who somehow, I'm working as hard as I can to generate outrage and controversy. I've been on Rogan like 15 times more than him, and still when I'm on, all anyone wants to talk about is Daryl Cooper. And look, I think this in and of itself just says something that's so fascinating. I mean, the guy had one almost throwaway line on the Tucker Carlson show, where, by the way, he caveated it in the beginning and the end. Said, I just say this to get a rise out of my buddy. I'm kind of ribbing him. Also, I'm being hyperbolic. And when I say Churchill's the villain, I don't mean that he committed the most atrocities or was the worst person. And it's like, my God, this sentence, the reaction alone to it almost proves the point, that which ultimately is what Daryl Cooper was making, which is that World War II has become essentially our religion. It is down to the fact that if somebody were to say they're a devil worshiper, you wouldn't even bring them on your show, Pierce, because it's not that interesting. No one's even going to want to watch that. It's not.
No, but I think. No, but hang on, Dave.
But if you're,
Dave, I would say,
if you're a Nazi,
I admire your defense. I admire your defense, but let's be clear. If someone is going to say that Churchill's the chief villain of World War II, they deserve all that's coming their way, because Churchill tried to defend from a genocidal maniac called Adolf Hitler. I don't think there's any debate to be had. When you do that, you are deliberately putting yourself in the fire. Anyway, let's move on.
Fair enough. And maybe he could have been more precise in that comment. But to your larger question,
if we make both sides have to fight fair, then Hamas would lose, so we can't ask them to fight fair. It sums up the reasoning. They're just outcome oriented. They just hate Israel, so whatever they do, they'll say it's bad.
Look, I mean, all of this stuff is somewhat debatable and somewhat arbitrary. I tend to err on the side of, I think you were right to have Dan on your show. And I think that it's like, look, this is, if you think this stuff is bubbling up on the internet and it's very concerning to you, okay, well, look, we had a massive experiment between 2016 and then really culminating in 2020 and then kind of died down after Elon Musk bought Twitter. We had a massive experiment in internet censorship and deplatforming. Where did that get us? I mean, I think it's much healthier to air these grievances out and give pushback where warranted. And I think I tend to lean in that direction. But I will have the humility to admit, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that's not the best way to go. I tend to be on the side of a free exchange of ideas.
So based.
Eric.
So the concern that I have is there's no real solution if we try to solve this problem in terms of platforming, free speech, who's an expert, who isn't, what's the credential. We're not even being genuine, in my opinion, about what it is that we're talking about. Let's give a simple example. I can essentially guarantee you that 6 million people on the nose of Jewish faith were not killed during the Holocaust. I don't know what the number was, but the odds that it would have all of those round zeros and come in exactly where it does is negligible.
It's called an estimate. Yeah. I'm sure he's about to make a point.
Every time I hear somebody make that point, I worry.
Oh.
Right? Because the idea is it's like somebody picking at the asbestos who isn't looking like a registered asbestos removal company.
Okay.
There's a way in which World War II settled in a particular way, which is, thank God we didn't appease infinitely. We had an absolute monster on our hands. There were extermination camps. Genocide matters as a word. We sat with Stalin despite our obvious differences, because sometimes you have to do. There's a certain sort of story about it. It's kind of directionally true if imperfect, because it's too clean, it's too clear, et cetera, et cetera. What you see now is this mania for, hey, I found out all of these interesting facts. Did you know about the Rosenstrasse protest? What was that? Oh, where women married to half Jewish men got their men back by protesting in Rosenstrasse, showing that the Nazis could be made to relent. No, I didn't know that. So now you're in a situation in which
what is even
each
hatching
kind
in
of
inventory?
fact, whether it's the McCullough memo or the Rosenstrasse protest, is an opportunity to pick at the asbestos. And partially, it's not really a religion. And I talked to Dave about this morning privately. There's a French philosopher, I think his name is Renan, whose great quote is, "A nation is a group of people who have agreed to forget something in common." Unfortunately, we have a very simplistic notion at the moment that because we've been lied to by these elites, and boy, is that clear over the last several years, we are now deciding that we're going to pick at everything that might be a fiction, everything that might not be exactly true. And by the way, we have a new problem with X, which was formerly Twitter, which is that you cannot walk a foot in it without being covered in anti-Semitic leeches if your last name sounds like mine. And Dave, I've understood the same thing as me.
Fuck. His points are reasonable here, but you know what? I don't like it because he's Jewish. I wonder if, it's really great that you have this strong position on this here, but is it because this is just the type of stuff that you outwardly have to deal with? If this was any other issue, have you lost your humanity on it? It's just because this is the one that personally affects you that you have such a strong position on it? I don't know. That's wild to me.
Been happening to you. We are not finding the formula for a good life. It's not coming about by censorship. It's not coming about by false expertise, and it's not coming about by an anonymous free-for-all where everybody is sharing everything at an equal level, and we have no ability to discern what's going on, and it's not being settled through debate or combat, David. I agree with you on that.
And Eric, what did you make of the debate with Dave and Douglas?
I don't think it was a debate. I don't think that's what happened. My guess, and again, I haven't talked to Joe about this, and if I had talked to Joe...
Here's a clip of Daryl Cooper on Tucker. I don't remember if we watched this or not.
In 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local...
Oh, have we watched this one? This is a repaste of every Nazi revisionist argument ever. That the people... Did we watch this or not? When people starved to death, the reason why they starved was just because the Nazis just didn't have enough food to feed them. It was never intentional. It was just a super sad outcome of the war.
Political prisoners and so forth that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that. And they just threw these people into camps, and millions of people ended up dead there. You have letters as early as July, August 1941 from commandants of these makeshift camps that they're setting up for these millions of people who are surrendering or people they're rounding up. And so it's 2 months after, a month or two after Barbarossa was launched. And they're writing back to the high command in Berlin saying, we can't feed these people. We don't have the food to feed these people. And one of them actually says, rather than wait for them all to slowly starve this winter, wouldn't it be more humane to just finish them off quickly now? And so this is 2 months into the invasion, right? And my view on this, I argue with my Zionist interlocutors about this all the time with regard to the current war in Gaza.
That's crazy, Chad.
Look, man, maybe you, as the Germans, you felt like you had to invade to the east. Maybe you thought that Stalin was such a threat, or that if he launched a surprise attack and seized the oil fields in Romania, that you would now not have the fuel to actually respond, and you'd be crippled, and all of Europe would be under threat. And
whatever it was that like maybe you thought you had to do that, but at the end of the day, you launched that war with no plan to care for the millions and millions of civilians and prisoners of war that were going to come under your control. And millions of people died because of that, right? And you can look at it and say like, so get back to your main question about Churchill. If you go to 1939, when the Germans and the Soviet Union invade Poland, as soon as that war's wrapped up on the German side, Hitler starts firing off peace proposals to Britain and France because they had already declared war. He didn't expect them to declare war, actually. Like there's a famous scene where he kind of throws a fit when he finds out that they did do that. And so he doesn't want to fight France. He doesn't want to fight Britain. He feels that's going to weaken Europe when we've got this huge threat to the east, the communist threat over there. And he starts firing off peace proposals. He says, let's not do this. Like, we can't do this.
So selfless.
And, of course,
hero.
A year goes by, 1940 comes around, and they're still at war. And so he launches his invasion to the west, takes over France, takes over Western and Northern Europe. Once that's done, and the British have, escaped at Dunkirk, there's no British force left on the continent. There's no opposing force left on the continent. In other words, the war is over, and the Germans won. Okay,
by what point?
Fall of 1940, right? So there's literally no opposing force on the continent, and throughout that summer, Adolf Hitler is firing off radio broadcasts, giving speeches, literally sending planes over to drop leaflets over London and other British cities, trying to get the message to these people that Germany does not want to fight you. Like, we don't want to fight you. Offering peace proposals that, it said, you keep all your overseas colonies. We don't want any of that. We want Britain to be strong. The world needs Britain to be strong, especially as we face this communist threat and so forth. Like, this is what's going on. And I think that if there were people in Britain who, if they hadn't, put it this way, if they hadn't been so successful at delegitimizing the peace approach by demonizing Neville Chamberlain and so forth, and holding him responsible for the invasion of Poland, that people would have been, they would have understood, like, we don't need a repeat of the First World War. We don't, which is not what ended up happening, but that's what everybody thought was going to happen. And so Churchill, you have a guy, Churchill wanted a war. He wanted to fight Germany. And the reason that I don't begrudge him that, people can national leaders, you can fight whoever you want. If you feel like your the long-term interests of the British Empire are threatened by the rise of a powerful continental power like Germany, and you need to check that those are great power games, and you play them the way you feel like you need to play them. That's fine. The reason I resent Churchill so much for it is that he kept this war going when he had no way to go back and fight this war. All he had were bombers. He was literally, by 1940, sending bomber fleets to go firebomb the Black Forest, just to burn down sections of the Black Forest. Just rank terrorism, going through and starting to, what eventually became just the carpet bombing, the saturation bombing of civilian neighborhoods, to kill, the purpose of which was to kill as many civilians as possible. And all the men were out in the field, all the fighting.
So when does he get to the part where he's just being hyperbolic, by the way? This is all the hyperbolic part? Is that?
Age men were out in the field. And so this is old people, it's women and children, and they knew that. And they were wiping these places out. It was as gigantic scaled terrorist attacks, the greatest scale of terrorist attacks you've ever seen in world history.
Why would he do that?
Yeah, what?
Because it was the only means that they had to continue fighting at the time. They didn't have the ability to reinvade Europe. And so he needed to keep this war going until he accomplished what he hoped to accomplish. We know now there's actually a really great series of books. It's one of the best. I recommend it to everybody, but it's really expensive now, and it's 6 long volumes called History of British Special Operations in the Second World War. And one of the books gets into the level of just the extent of media operations, propaganda operations, everything that they were running in the United States to eventually drag us into that.
Does this Daryl Brooks guy talk to any historians ever? No, I think these people exclusively just make the rounds on midwit shows to basically dazzle them with their historical facts and then do whatever the fuck you call this.
War. And that was his whole plan. His whole plan was we don't have a way to fight this war ourselves. This war's over. We need either the Soviet Union or the United States to do it for us, and that was the plan, and kept the war going long enough for that plan to come to fruition. And to me, it's a craven,
evil,
ugly way to fight a war.
True.
And
what was the motive?
Conquest, empire power.
Well, Churchill's got a long and complicated history. I mean, he's somebody
He's a hater.
who
He's a hater.
That was the wryest smile I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, look.
Just say he was a
I think
fucking
on
hater.
one level, there was a sense that Churchill was sort of humiliated by his performance in the First World War as the head of the Admiralty, and he was out in the cold for a long time.
You mean Gallipoli?
Yeah, and which was his operation.
Yeah,
and so he was rightly held responsible for that and seen as responsible for one of the great disasters that the British suffered during that war. And so I think part of it was probably kind of personal. He wanted redemption. He wanted to go out there and prove that he's the warlord that can go out there and fight this big war. Probably. I think part of it, I read about Churchill and he strikes me as a psychopath.
True.
But he's also he was a drunk. He was very childish in strange ways. People would talk about how as an adult, as prime minister, they'd find him in his room and he's playing with action figures like war toys and army men and stuff.
True.
And would get mad when people would interrupt him.
His playtime.
When he was doing this. This is a strange
psychopath.
Fellow, There's all those things. But then you get into why was Winston Churchill such a psychopath? Such a dedicated booster of Zionism from early on in his life, right?
Ooh, yeah.
And there's ideological reasons. In 1920, he wrote a kind of infamous now article called Zionism versus Bolshevism. And he basically makes the case that, which was true to a large extent, that all of Eastern Europe, the Pale of Settlement, which is where the vast majority of Jews lived, other than the United States, which is where a lot of them had traveled to, that area had become so engulfed by a revolutionary spirit that all the young Ashkenazi Jews who were over there were getting swept up into it. It was the 60s here on steroids, right? And in a much more serious and ended up being destructive way. And this is 1920, so this is shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution. Basically, the point of his paper is he says these people who are over there, they're all going one direction or the other. They're going to be Bolsheviks. They're going to be Zionists. We want them to be Zionists, and so we need to support this. And so that was early on. There was an ideological component of it. But then as time goes on, you read...
I like how this is just the most fucking historical revisionism you've ever heard in your entire life. What part of this was supposed to be hyperbolic again?
Stories about Churchill going bankrupt and needing money
from
getting
Zionist
bailed
bankers,
out by people who shared
Jews.
His interests.
True.
In terms of Zionism, but also his hostility, I think his hostility to put it this way, I think his hostility to Germany was real. I don't think that he necessarily had to be bribed to have that feeling.
But he might have been.
But I think he was, to an extent, put in place by people, the financiers.
Damn, think about that. So World War II and the Holocaust was literally started by, or at least encouraged by, the Jewish bankers that were trying to call their dead in on Churchill. Base, let him cook.
By a media complex that wanted to make sure that he was the guy who was representing Britain in that conflict for a reason. And
not a historian, by the way. Just
Churchill's a again, it's so hard because and especially in a short interview like this where you have this guy who, he's an Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Martin Luther King type figure in the sort of Western consciousness, right?
Yes.
And so people have so many assumptions and built-in triggers when it comes to this guy that it's hard to talk about him because you're always thinking about the triggers that you're setting off in your listeners. And I don't say that in a way of I don't want to offend anybody.
No,
or whatever.
I understand.
It's that that things are going to be misunderstood. And so this is why I do 30-hour podcasts.
It's interesting because as a follower of your work, I don't see you as hostile to the West. I see you actually as a product of the West and as a defender, really, of the West or its values.
True.
In your approach, in your open-mindedness, rigor, belief in accuracy and honesty. I mean, those are Western notions. And yet Churchill has been positioned and has been really accepted as like the defender of the West.
When it couldn't be further from the truth.
100 years.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's, and I wonder why that is. I don't, I mean, people can certainly take issue with any factual claims you're making. I assume they're all right. They're consistent with what I think I know to be true. But why do you think Churchill has been presented in the way that he has?
Yeah, well, it has to do with what you said earlier, right? Neville Chamberlain versus Churchill has been the binary model that has served as the chief rhetorical device for every conflict we've wanted to get into since then.
Yes.
The entire Cold War and then even...
Okay, anyway. That's him being a hyperbolic jokester. Okay.
About it, I couldn't say because I don't transmit private conversations. But if I had to make a guess, Douglas was trying to do something normal, which is that as an author, he was calling on a friend to say, hey, I have a new book and I'd like to be talking about it to generate some interest. And my guess is that because the book involved Israel and because Joe was open at the beginning of this program and saying that he found barbarism in Israel's actions, my guess is that Joe was probably very comfortable with Douglas and very uncomfortable with the book. And my belief is that he called in Dave because Dave, whether he's an expert or not, I will say he has a tremendous number of facts that go against the Israeli narrative. And that whether or not he's considered to be, a self-credentialed scholar, I haven't really looked at Dave's work enough to know. I would say that what Joe was doing was to say, I want to make sure that Douglas is balanced because I, Joe, believe that barbarism is being defended.
That's kind of funny because I think somebody on my subreddit said this, that what actually happened was it actually was responsible platforming. That's what Joe Rogan was trying to do, but he was doing it on the other side. He was worried that Douglas Murray was going to come in and do too much pro-Israel without actually having some pushback. So Joe Rogan's responsible platforming was bringing in Dave Smith to check Murray. Oh my God.
And I'm not comfortable with that. But because we don't have the backstory to it, we don't really realize what happened in the first opening moments of the exchange, which was very, very strange.
And you've just come back from Israel, Eric. I mean, where do you think we are with this war? And in terms of the moral debate that I had between Dave and John Spencer earlier about whether civilians are being deliberately targeted, what do you feel about that part of the debate about the war?
First of all, war is war. And whatever Israel, that is the government's intention, I can assure you that when you put that many kids with guns into their first shooting war, bad stuff is going to happen at some level. We always talk about, what is the normal amount of friendly fire accidents? Nobody wants it. Is there any civilian that's being targeted? I have no doubt that in every war, somebody with a gun does the wrong thing or who targets improperly because they're pissed off. I don't know. That's not my issue. What I can tell you is the war is completely not portrayed accurately. And I just went back to a clip that I recorded with Konstantin Kisin on October 14th, so 7 days after and before Israel went into Gaza. And what I said was, this is Munchausen by proxy. Sinwar is the mother. He's desperately trying to get his women and children killed. This is not human shields, by the way. This is an innovation that I would call not human shields, but subterranean crosshair strategy, where you put your military tunnels underneath mosques, orphanages, schools, etc. Because the key in hybrid warfare is video. And video is much more powerful than the kinetic war. So Israel's winning the kinetic war, losing the hybrid war. Sinwar is still controlling it from his grave. And the only tell of this is that you still hold hostages in Gaza, Hamas does, and you're getting people to give a victory chant from the river to the sea, celebrating a genocide that has yet to happen. The whole purpose is to keep the world supplied with video because none of us have the stomach. I could hear that Dave doesn't. I don't either. For watching war video. Because in part, Western Europe and North America has been at peace since 1945. We've lost the ability to watch war.
And Dave, I mean, it's interesting though, because I was talking to my kids about this, they're from 31 to 13, but when I was young, you couldn't follow war in the way that you can now through a phone. with seeing every single thing that's happening in gruesome, uncensored detail beamed straight to your face. You know, when I was in my teens, the Falklands War happened, for example, when the UK went to war with Argentina over this small island, the Falkland Islands. And my memory was a very sanitized coverage. And when you saw, you know, quite long distance footage of bombs going off and stuff, what you didn't see was what I see on my phone all day long, which is people's heads being blown off and horrific, terrible imagery, which I think is partly responsible for why so many young people are getting their brains fried by their phones, by the way. This constant horrific dopamine that's coming their way. But also, it was very sanitized, the coverage that you could see from newspapers, from the very few television news programs and so on. We were really protected from the harsh reality of war in a way that is not applicable right now. We see it all. And I think that Israel can have all the arguments that it wants, and I have a lot of sympathy with many of them. But what they've lost, without any doubt to me at all, is they've lost the PR war through video coverage from the battlefield. You know, that's what's horrified people the most.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's exactly right, Pearson. I mean, I have I have a fairly early memory of George H.W. Bush announcing the invasion of Ukraine in the Persian Gulf War when I was like a little kid, like 7 or 8 or something like that. But even when George W. Bush invaded Iraq, the images that we would see would be like these aerial views of a projectile going in and kind of an explosion in the distance. And okay, that's a lot easier to root for than seeing the image of a baby with his arm blown off on the which, I mean, my God, all day long on Twitter I see that. And I do, you know, I agree with Eric. I do see a lot of like Jew hatred on Twitter. It's just hard for me to make that kind of at the top of my hierarchy of outrages when I'm also watching babies being blown apart every day on my Twitter. And I agree with your assessment, Piers. I don't think it's very, very good for the soul. But, you know, what's interesting as you say this is that I really think it gets to the point that I was trying to make in the first half of this program, which is that what's happening here is that people are being brought closer and closer to the reality of war. And, you know, I do feel like for the first half of this show, it's almost like I was debating like an Aztec high priest about child sacrifice. And I'm sitting here and saying, hey, this is murdering a child. And he's sitting and saying, you don't even understand the doctrine. You don't even understand what it is that we're doing here. And it's like, no, look, the reality is, in effect, this is what's happening. And I think Eric's right also. Part of this has to do with the fact that we're wealthier than previous generations. We have a different understanding of morality, but it is just not the case. Also, I think it's part of the fact that in the West we have less children. And we have less children and we value the lives of our children that we have more. All of these things play a role. But again, the essential point, which I've said several times on the show to you, Pierce, here is right, is that this is the whole game. Asymmetrical warfare. The action is always in the reaction, right? You could watch Osama bin Laden's son had a great article. If you want to Google it, it's Osama bin Laden dead and loving it. And he wrote it like 2 years after Osama bin Laden died. And he was just talking about how like this is in my father's wildest dreams. He couldn't have imagined you would invade Afghanistan and invade Iraq and overthrow Gaddafi and take all of these other steps. The whole point of 9/11 wasn't to destroy America by bringing down our towers. It was to lure us into a war where he could bankrupt the United States of America, just as our CIA had trained him to do with the Soviets. And so
it didn't happen. Okay.
The whole game here from Hamas was to get Israel to do exactly what Israel's doing now and turn the entire world against them. Wow. And from that obviously it's a sick, disgusting game to play. But from that perspective, they've been incredibly successful.
I mean, Eric, anyone who's watched the 45-minute film that Israel authorities produced of all the gruesome lowlights of what happened on October the 7th will feel the same sickening sense of utter revulsion that I felt when I watched it, as I have done to the scenes I've seen from Gaza. You know, it was utterly horrific what happened on that day. And so I completely understand why so many Israelis and Jewish people around the world have felt so utterly determined to get rid of Hamas at all costs. I totally get all this. But in relation to what Dave said at the end there, you know, just final word to you, where does that leave us, do you think?
I'm confused because I watched these videos and I hate it. It scars my mind. I will never be the same person after watching the gruesome nature of what's happened in Gaza. Some of it is fake, some of it is real. It doesn't matter. What I don't understand, and I'm just completely at a loss, is this hardens one's heart against whom? You know, my tweet that I keep reading from October 17th, before Israel went into North Gaza, IDF-assisted suicide, Zugzwang, Munchausen by proxy. I said, this is going to be horrific. Innocent life is going to be lost in Gaza. This is a plan. And every time I see that, and I see people holding hostages, I think, wow, how fascinating that the world can't put together the fact that Israel is in effect forced to move. And this was clear before Israel ever went into Gaza. Sinwar, one of the things I did when I was in Israel was to yell at the Israelis, saying, you had an evil genius who bested you. You pride yourself on your intellectual achievement. You lost. You're still talking about human shields. This guy's 2 moves, 3 moves ahead of you from the grave. And the fact is, I feel what Dave feels. I just feel it 100% towards Hamas. I don't understand. If people do not realize what war is, where it will be brought, whether it's Charlie Hebdo or the Bataclan or a parade in Nice, you are talking about a level of warfare that you cannot accept because it is predicated on a strategy of women and children being the biggest munition in war. This is the great asset in hybrid war. And what we are seeing is an innovation that has to be stopped. Israel is so bad at this. It hasn't figured out. Imagine if they had the supposed imaging we have for under the pyramids to map the tunnels of Gaza. Imagine that they developed ingenious ways of getting down there to spare more life. This is a call for Israel not to lose its soul. But the fact is that it's being outplayed by a dead master strategist. And, you know, my feeling is that when Israel speaks and tries to justify itself, it tends to lose me. The way that I really shifted my sympathies in this whole thing was by listening to the Arabs and listening to Hamas. And when they justify this, I just think, my God, as bad as I think Netanyahu has been in handling all of this, the absolute genius and complete evil of the Arab position here is something that has to be contested, and Israel does not appear to have better means to do it.
Yeah, and let's not forget that the official spokesman for Hamas, about 2 weeks after October the 7th, on camera, said that their intention was to do the same thing again and again and again. Which I think is something that people often forget
Dave
about.
have nothing to say?
In the mix of all this, which is Hamas is wedded to
Don't let him do the Zio talking points on you.
And that's, I think, a very important cog in this.
Yeah, but let's keep in mind
you
who's
guys,
actually
I've got to
being
leave it.
annihilated.
What?
In this.
Yeah, but let's keep in mind who's actually being annihilated.
Oh, okay. Good job.
Well, I think, listen, there's no question that the scale of the retribution, one of the questions I asked repeatedly, as you know, Dave, throughout the months after October 7th, was what is proportionate? I don't know the answer. I do know from relatives of mine who fought wars that once a war starts, it's very, very difficult to control it. And it tends to be something that evolves in the way that it evolves, and history will show that a lot of innocent people get killed in every war that's ever been conducted. But what is happening in Gaza right now, I've never understood quite what Israel's end game is. I totally understand. They want to have the hostages released, and they should be. But what happens after you have flattened Gaza, short of what Trump is advocating of 2 million people migrating to neighboring Arab countries, which is a form of ethnic cleansing we haven't seen in modern times, in my estimation, by the definition of ethnic cleansing, I don't know how this ends or what happens afterwards. But it's whatever it is, it's going to be extremely messy to resolve. I've got to leave it there. Guys, Dave, I thoroughly enjoyed your debate with Douglas. I thoroughly enjoy you coming on Uncensored. I think you're what I would call you're a good faith actor. I always believe with you, as I do with Douglas actually, that I think you believe what you say. People may take issue with it, they may disagree with you, but I think both of you come from a position of believing what you say.
Well,
and I
good.
obviously feel the same with you, Eric, and that's why you're 3 of my favourite guests. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Piers. Thank you, Eric.
Piers Morgan Uncensored is proudly independent. The only boss around here is me. If you enjoy our show, we offer only one simple thing. Hit subscribe on YouTube and follow Piers Morgan Uncensored on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in return, we will continue our mission to inform, irritate.
When the fuck is Biden speaking?